So hey guys, this is your favorite fictional vortex. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto was a human survivor who became a legend to the machines. Naruto XA2, Nier, Automata. But before we start, remember to subscribe and like this video. Now let's start. Chapter 1. The Ghost of Gaia. The wind had a voice, and it spoke of erosion. It was a language attacker type number. 2 understood intimately. She felt it in the protesting shriek of her own actuators, a symphony of microscopic tears and stresses that mirrored the world around her. The magnetic sandstorm that had boiled up from the desiccated guts of the old continent was a relentless beast, a physical manifestation of the planet's long, slow suicide. It was not mere weather, it was an act of abrasion. Grains of ferrite and silica, whipped to supersonic speeds, scoured the skeletal remains of the city, stripping rusted steel down to a brief, protesting gleam before dulling it to a uniform, pitted gray. The sky was a toxic bruise of purple and ochre, a ceiling of roiling dust so thick that the concept of day and night had been rendered obsolete. Time was now measured in the rising and falling pitch of the gale and the intermittent, blinding flashes of static discharge that arced between the tallest of the architectural corpses. From her perch within the hollowed-out optic sensor of a fallen Goliath, A2 surveyed the howling chaos. Her white hair, already a stark anomaly in the gloom, was whipped into a frenzy, lashing against the synthetic skin of her face and neck. The fabric of her dark combat gear, torn and frayed from 1,000 other battles, snapped and fluttered with a sound like frantic, tearing wings. Every particle of grit that found its way into the delicate seams of her joints was a fresh insult, a tiny dagger grinding away at her operational lifespan. Her internal chronometer marked 73 standard hours since her last proper maintenance cycle. 73 hours of running, fighting, and hiding. 73 hours of the world trying to unmake her, one grain of sand at a time. A flickering red icon in the periphery of her vision demanded attention. Warning. Biofiber integrity at 37%. Immediate repair recommended. Caution. Left leg servo motor S7 exhibiting critical strain feedback. Locomotion failure imminent. Alert. Primary energy reserves at 19%. Non-essential functions deactivated. She dismissed the alerts with a thought, the crimson text vanishing from her sight. The warnings were redundant. She was the warning. Every aching joint, every stutter in her movements, was a more eloquent testament to her condition than any diagnostic text. The long gash that ran from her left hip to her knee, a parting gift Fr. Omayorha squadron that had gotten too close 3 days prior, wept a thin, black lubricant that was immediately plastered with a fine layer of dust, creating a grotesque, gritty scab. Her hunt was one of necessity. The target was a mid-sized bipedal machine, a standard Explorer model, but one known to operate in this sector. More importantly, data scavenged from a defunct Resistance terminal suggested this particular model series was equipped with a Mark IV high-density energy condenser. It was an older piece of tech, inefficient by Yorha standards but robust. More importantly, its energy discharge could be jury-rigged to jumpstart her own failing power core and, with some dangerous modifications, cauterize the worst of her internal damage. It was a desperate gambit, but desperation was the only currency she had left. Her auditory sensors, filtered to suppress the roar of the storm, focused on a specific frequency band. She listened for the rhythmic, clumsy footfalls of a machine, the antithesis of an android's calculated grace. There, a quarter-kilometer to the east, masked by the ruins of what the pre-war archives called a transportation hub. A faint, repetitive crunching sound. Metal on rubble. Pushing off from her shelter, A2 landed silently on the debris-strewn ground below. The impact sent a lance of agony up her damaged leg, and a fresh wave of error messages flooded her vision. She ignored them, sinking into a low crouch and moving with a predator's economy of motion. She was a ghost in a city of ghosts, her pale form a fleeting specter against the bruised sky. The storm was both her enemy and her cloak. Its magnetic chaos would blind the machine's primitive sensors as effectively as it hampered her own advanced ones, leveling the playing field. Navigating the ruins was like traversing the fossilized bones of a god. Twisted girders clawed at the sky. Concrete pylons lay shattered like colossal femurs, and the empty windows of silent towers stared out the vacant eye sockets of a million skulls. A2 moved through it all with a grim familiarity. This was her world now, a graveyard where the war was the only thing that still felt alive. The concepts of hope, purpose, and loyalty had been casualties long ago, their markers lost in the endless, shifting sands of betrayal. All that remained was the machine, the mission, and the moment. And for her, the mission was simple: survive. For what purpose, she no longer asked. To ask was to invite a pain deeper than any physical wound. She closed the distance, her movements perfectly synchronized with the howling gusts of wind. The machine came into view, precisely as the data had indicated. It was a standard stubby, its cylindrical head swiveling aimlessly as it patrolled a small, collapsed plaza. Its movements were jerky, inefficient. It was alone, too alone. A flicker of suspicion, a finely honed instinct born from countless ambushes, stayed her hand. Her own existence was a testament to the fact that Yorha's intelligence was not infallible. The machine network was a learning entity. It adapted. It evolved. It set traps. She scanned the area again, her optical sensors cycling through thermal, electromagnetic, and particle density filters. The storm made it difficult, creating a blizzard of false positives and sensor ghosts. But there was nothing. No hidden energy signatures. No buried units. Just the stubby, the storm, and the silence of the dead city. Perhaps her paranoia was getting the better of her. Her systems were failing. Maybe her logic processors were next. She needed that condenser. With a final, decisive thought, she launched herself from the shadows. Her movements were a blur of black and white, her personal particle upthrust field giving her a momentary burst of speed that was faster than the eye could track. Her blade, the Type 40 sword, materialized in her hand, its edge humming with a low, hungry energy. The stubby swiveled, its single red optic widening in alarm, but it was far too late. It was an obsolete model fighting a rogue pinnacle of android technology. The blade sliced through the machine's torso with a clean, satisfying hiss of superheated metal. There was no resistance. The top half of the stubby slid sideways, crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks and severed cables. The kill was perfect, and it was a mistake. Before the machine's wreckage had even settled, the ground beneath it erupted, not with an explosion, but with a silent, terrible speed. The concrete and rubble were thrown aside as four massive, razor-tipped limbs, black as polished obsidian, burst from the earth. They were attached to a central chassis the size of a Yorha flight unit, a low-slung, arachnoid body that hugged the ground. It didn't look like any machine in her database. Its armor was not the usual dull alloy. It was a chameleonic composite, shifting in texture and color to mimic the surrounding debris. It had been buried, dormant, using the stubby's energy signature as bait. A fifth limb, a long, whip-like tail tipped with a magnetic grappling claw, shot out, not at her, but at the wreckage of the stubby. It snatched the two halves, retracting, them into the main body where they were immediately broken down and absorbed, the energy condenser no doubt powering the very monster that now faced her. It was learning. It was recycling. It was efficient. A crimson designation appeared on her HUD, broadcast from the machine itself. A challenge. Designation: Reaper Class, Hunter-Killer Unit 7. Objective: eradicate Yorha Attacker Prototype A2. So, it wasn't just a random trap. It was for her. Yorha Command, in its infinite wisdom, had likely leaked her location to the machine network. A win-win for them. Either their deserter problem was solved, or a dangerous new machine type was field-tested. Her life was just data on a balance sheet. The familiar, bitter acid of rage flooded her throat. "Come on then," she whispered, her voice a ow growl that was swallowed by the storm. "Let's see what you've got." The Reaper didn't waste time on posturing. It moved with a speed that belied its size, its four primary limbs scuttling across the broken terrain with uncanny silence. A2 dashed back, her sword a silver arc in the gloom, deflecting a limb that stabbed where she had been a nanosecond before. The impact shuddered up her arm, far stronger than she'd anticipated. The limb's tip was coated in an abrasive, diamond-laced dust that scraped loudly against her blade, trying to grind it down. This was new, a machine designed not just to overpower, but to wear down Yorha assets, to exploit their reliance on finite equipment and repair capabilities. She activated her berserk mode. A wave of incandescent red energy washed over her, the world snapped into a new dimension of clarity and pain. Her internal limiters disengaged. Power flooded her systems from a reserve capacitor, overclocking every motor and processor. The frayed edges of her combat gear began to glow with crimson light. The trade-off was catastrophic systems degradation, but in a fight like this, there was no holding back. Warning. Berserk mode active. Kata's trophic system failure will occur in T-180 seconds. She was a meteor, a comet of vengeance. She closed the distance in an instant, her blade a blur. She rained down 100 blows in the space of a few seconds. Sparks flying like a forge fire in the storm. The Reaper's armor was incredibly resilient, deflecting most of her strikes. She managed to score a deep gash in one of its legs, but the creature responded with terrifying intelligence. It used its other 3 limbs not to attack, but to defend, creating an impenetrable cage of obsidian blades around its core. Then it unleashed its second trick. A high-frequency EMP burst erupted from its chassis. It wasn't powerful enough to shut her down completely, but it was tuned to a specific frequency. Her optical sensors dissolved into a waterfall of static. Her auditory sensors screeched with feedback, and for a full 2 seconds, she was blind and deaf. An eternity. In that darkness, something massive slammed into her side. It felt like a building had fallen on her. She was thrown through the air, tumbling end over end, before crashing through the crumbling wall of a long-dead hab block. She landed in a shower of concrete dust and shattered rebar. The impact jolting every component in her body. Critical damage. Rib cage superstructure compromised. Multiple power conduits severed. Warning. Left leg servo motor S7 has failed. Locomotion impaired. Her left leg was dead. It dragged uselessly behind her as she forced herself to her feet, leaning heavily on her sword. The Reaper emerged from the dust cloud, its single, central optic glowing with a predatory crimson light. It wasn't rushing anymore. It had assessed her. It had wounded her. Now it was going to dismantle her. It stalked forward slowly, its limbs clicking on the floor. It was giving her time to despair. That was its greatest mistake. A2 did not know despair. She only knew rage. With a scream that was part defiance and part agony, she channeled the Saint dregs of her energy into her right leg and launched herself forward, not at the machine, but up. She kicked off a dangling concrete slab, spiraling up towards the shattered ceiling 3 stories above. Her plan was to come down on it from above, a final, desperate gambit to pierce its central core. The Reaper was faster. Its whip-like tail, the same one that had snatched the stubby, shot upwards. It wasn't aiming for her body. It wrapped around her damaged leg, the magnetic lock clamping down on the deadened limb with crushing force. Her momentum was arrested with a sickening jolt. She was dangling, helpless, 20 feet in the air. The Reaper simply held her there, its optic seeming to study her, to savor the moment. It began to slowly, sadistically, retract the tail, drawing her closer to its waiting, bladed limbs. Her HUD was a Christmas tree of crimson warnings. Energy reserves were critical. Berserk mode was seconds from its burnout point. This was it, the end of the line. A pointless, ignominious death in a forgotten corner of a dead world. A fitting end for a deserter. For a tool that had outlived its purpose. She closed her eyes, a flicker of an ancient memory, green hills, a blue sky. A promise made to comrades long since turned to dust, flashing through her consciousness. Everyone, I'm sorry. The final blow was about to descend. One of the Reaper's massive forelimbs rose, its razor edge gleaming in the gloom. And then, a sound. It was a sound that did not belong. It wasn't the shriek of the wind, the crunch of metal, or the hum of energy. It was a sharp, clear whistle, like a bird call in the heart of a hurricane. A flash of lightning, brighter than any before, illuminated the entire plaza. And in that frozen, bleached white moment, A2 saw him. A silhouette, standing on the edge of a collapsed rooftop opposite them. He was not large, nor did he carry any discernible weapon. He was just there. A man, a human. The thought was so absurd, so contrary to every known fact of the universe, that her logic processors flagged it as a sensor ghost, a hallucination brought on by system failure. The Reaper paused. Its limb, poised to strike, froze in midair. Its optic swiveled to face the newcomer. It, too, recognized an anomaly. The figure on the roof moved. He didn't jump or use a thruster. He simply dropped, falling 3 stories with the casual grace of a falling leaf. He landed on the rubble-strewn ground without a sound, his knees bending slightly to absorb the impact. The storm seemed to part around him, the howling winds muffling into a respectful quiet in his immediate vicinity. He wore simple, functional clothing of a design she had never seen: dark pants, a high-collared jacket of a strange, organic-looking material, and worn boots. His hair was a shocking splash of sun yellow, and his eyes, even from this distance, seemed to burn with an impossible, azure light. On his cheeks were faint marks, like scars or tattoos, 6 lines that gave his face a feral, untamed quality. He looked at the Reaper, then his gaze flicked up to her, dangling helplessly. There was no pity in his eyes, only a calm, appraising curiosity. "That's not a very nice way to treat a lady," he said. His voice was warm, carrying easily over the wind, laced with an amusement that was utterly out of place in this world of death and decay. The Reaper, having processed the new variable, dismissed it as a non-threat. Its programming was clear: eliminate the Yorha target. The limb resumed its descent. The man sighed, a sound of mild disappointment. "Your funeral." He moved. Or rather, he was simply elsewhere. There was no blur of motion, no particle upthrust effect her sensors could track. One moment he was standing 30 meters away, the next, he was directly beneath the Reaper, one hand raised. He didn't seem to be exerting himself. It looked as casual as swatting a fly. His open palm connected with the underside of the Reaper's massive chassis. There was no explosion, no clang of metal on metal. There was only a dull, resonant thump, like a stone dropped into a deep well. A visible shockwave, a ripple in the very air, expanded from the point of impact. The Reaper, a multi-ton construct of advanced alloys, was thrown bodily into the air. It flipped over, its limbs flailing uselessly, and crashed onto its back with a sound that shook the foundations of the ruined building. The tail holding A2 went limp, and she dropped to the floor in a heap, her system screaming at the fresh impact. She pushed herself up on her hands, her processors struggling to reconcile what her optics had just witnessed. It was impossible. The kinetic energy required for such a feat was beyond the scope of any known portable power source. It defied physics. The man hadn't moved from his spot. He just watched as the Reaper scrambled to right itself, its obsidian limbs scraping frantically against the concrete. It was clearly damaged, moving with a jerky, panicked gait. It recognized a true threat now. "My turn," the man said, a faint smile touching his lips. He raised his right arm, sweeping it sideways in a graceful arc. From his hand, a blade of pure, compressed wind erupted. It was invisible, but A2 could see its effect: a shimmering, blade-like distortion in the air that sliced through the storm's dust. It was 30 feet long, and it screamed with the sound of a jet engine. The Reaper tried to block it, raising 2 of its limbs. The wind blade did not slow. It passed through the obsidian alloy as if it were tissue paper, severing both limbs cleanly. They fell to the ground with a heavy clang, leaking hydraulic fluid and showering sparks. The machine let out a shriek of digital static, a sound of pure agony and confusion. It tried to retreat, cuttling backwards towards the hole it had emerged from. It was too slow. The man took a single step forward, his right hand rising to his side. He cupped his palm, and in it, energy began to coalesce. It was not the structured, contained energy of a Yorha Pod's laser, nor the chaotic discharge of a machine's cannon. This was something else entirely. It was a swirling, miniature typhoon of brilliant blue light, rotating with incredible speed, emitting a high-pitched, grinding shriek that set A2's teeth on edge. It was beautiful and terrifying, a captive star held in a human hand. A2's sensors went haywire, trying and failing to classify the energy signature. Error. Unknown energy pattern detected. Non-particulate, non-photonic, metaphysical signature, inconclusive. The man walked forward, his steps unhurried, the sphere of churning chaos in his hand illuminating his determined face. The Reaper fired a volley of plasma bursts from a hidden turret in its chest. The man didn't even bother to dodge. The plasma bolts simply evaporated, dissolving into nothingness a few feet from his body as if hitting an invisible, absolute defense. He reached the terrified, crippled machine. He didn't speak. He simply thrust his hand forward, pushing the swirling blue sphere into the Reaper's central chassis. The moment of contact was surreal. There was no grand explosion, no blinding flash. Instead, there was an implosion of sound. The shriek of the sphere and the digital scream of the machine were sucked into a vortex of absolute silence. The Reaper's armor began to buckle inwards, twisting and groaning as if caught in a localized gravity well. Metal folded, warped, and tore, being ground into metallic dust by the sphere's relentless rotation. The entire machine was being unmade from the inside out, collapsing in on itself around the point of impact. In 5 seconds, it was over. Where the Reaper had been, there was now only a compressed, twisted ball of scrap metal no larger than a cargo crate. Still glowing with residual heat, the blue sphere vanished, leaving behind nothing but an eerie silence and the faint smell of ozone. The storm, as if waiting for the conflict to end, began to subside. The howling wind softened to a mournful sigh. The perpetual twilight brightened by a few degrees, allowing faint, gray light to filter through the shattered ceilings. The man stood over the wreckage for a moment, his hand still outstretched. Then he lowered it, flexing his fingers as if he'd just finished a strenuous but satisfying piece of work. He turned his head, and his azure eyes met A2's. He walked over to her, his footsteps quiet on the rubble. She instinctively tried to push herself back, her sword held defensively in front of her, but her body refused to obey. The burnout from the berserk mode was complete, leaving her muscles feeling like frayed wires and her energy reserves flatlined. She was completely at his mercy. He stopped a few feet away, crouching down to her level. He looked her over, his gaze lingering on her damaged leg and the deep gash on her side. His expression was unreadable. "You're bleeding," he said, his voice calm. It wasn't a question or a statement of concern. It was a simple observation of fact. He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small, ceramic pot. He opened it, revealing a thick, green-gold paste that seemed to glow with a faint, internal light. It smelled of crushed leaves, damp earth, and something else, something alive. Before she could protest, he dipped 2 fingers into the paste and reached for the gash on her hip. Her every instinct screamed to attack, to cut him down. But she was frozen, partly by her system's failure, partly by a profound, overwhelming sense of awe and confusion. His fingers touched her synthetic skin. The paste was warm, impossibly so. As he smeared it over the wound, a strange tingling sensation spread through her. It wasn't the cold, sterile feeling of repair gel or the painful knitting of nanofiber paste. This was organic. She watched, mesmerized, as the edges of the wound seemed to pull together on their own. The black lubricant stopped weeping. The torn biofibers beneath her skin visibly knitted themselves back together, not as a patch, but as a seamless, perfect seal. In seconds, the gash that would have required hours of machine maintenance to fix was nothing more than a faint, silver line. He moved to her shattered leg, applying the same paste to the mangled joint. There was a soft crackle of energy, and she felt power conduits re-link, servos whining as they came back online. She flexed her toes. They responded. System recovery detected. Biofiber integrity at 92%. Left leg servo motor S7 is now operational. Efficiency at 85%. Notice. Unknown. Biological agent integrated into system. No negative side effects detected. He wiped his fingers on a cloth, capped the pot, and tucked it back into his pouch. He had just performed a miracle of left field repair with nothing but a strange balm and a gentle touch. He looked at her, his head tilted slightly. "All better," he said, as if he had just placed a bandage on a scraped knee. He stood up, turning his back to her and surveying the ruined plaza. He paid no mind to the compressed wreckage of the Reaper, showing no interest in scavenging its rare alloys or its power core. He seemed utterly indifferent to the spoils of his impossible victory. What are you?" A2 finally managed to ask, her voice raspy. He glanced over his shoulder, a small, enigmatic smile playing on his lips. "Just a guy." He started to walk away, heading towards the gaping hole in the transportation hub's far wall, his yellow hair a beacon in the gray gloom. A2 forced herself to her feet. Her body felt whole. The constant, grinding pain was gone, replaced by a strange warmth. Her energy levels were still low, but her physical integrity was restored. She looked at the man's retreating back, then at the twisted ball of metal that had been a state-of-the-art killing machine, then back at the man. Her entire life, her entire existence, was predicated on a set of rules. The rules of physics, the rules of combat, the rules of the war. Androids were humanity's angels. Machines were the enemy. Humanity was safe on the moon. These were absolute, unshakable truths. In the space of 10 minutes, this man had shattered every single one of them. He was an impossibility, a walking paradox, a ghost in a world of machines. Logic, protocol, and a lifetime of ingrained distrust screamed at her to let him go. To run in the opposite direction. He was an unknown variable, and unknown variables were dangerous. Survival meant sticking to what you knew. But for the first time in a very long time, something else stirred within her. A sensation she had thought long dead and buried with her comrades. It wasn't hope. It was something far more potent and far more dangerous. Curiosity. He was disappearing into the shadows of the ruin. Without a conscious decision, her newly repaired legs began to move. She started slowly at first, then picked up her pace, her sword dematerializing as she broke into a steady run. She had to know. In a world where nothing made sense anymore, the only thing worth pursuing was the one thing that made the least sense of all. She followed the impossible man into the heart of the storm-swept ruin, leaving the rules of her world shattered on the ground behind her. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Echoes in the wires. The signal arrived at the bunker without fanfare. It was not a distress call, nor a priority communique from the front lines. It was a ghost, a whisper on the quantum entanglement network, a single, corrupted data packet uploaded from the unique signature of a defunct prototype, Yorha attacker number 2. For 99.98% of the bunker's automated systems, the packet was meaningless, a piece of digital detritus destined for the regular data purge. It was flagged as corrupted, incomplete, and originating from a unit officially listed as destroyed 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days ago. It was, by all logical definitions, garbage. But the bunker was more than just logic. At its heart, in the cold, white, sterile sphere of the command center, sat the commander. And the commander's private filters were not merely logical. They were paranoid, comprehensive, and absolute. The alert that appeared on her main console was not the shrieking crimson of a direct threat, but a calm, insidious teal. Anomaly detected. Unregistered signal received from designation A2. Data integrity. 4.7%. Source location. Sector F8, Great Western Desert. Cross-referencing. Sector F8 is currently under Level 4 Magnetic Storm Advisory. Signal transmission under these conditions should be impossible. The commander, a figure of immaculate, severe authority in her white and black uniform, leaned forward slightly. Her silver-white hair was cut in a sharp, asymmetrical bob, and her eyes, the color of a winter sky, narrowed. The zero gravity of the command center allowed for a unique posture of command. She didn't sit in a chair but floated within a harness of polished chrome and white leather. Her console a holographic arc of light that enveloped her. The air around her was filtered, sterile, and silent, save for the faintest, almost subliminal hum of the station's life support and the quiet, ghostly chime of the teal alert. On screen, she said. Her voice was calm, measured, betraying no emotion. It was a voice that had ordered thousands to their deaths and processed the subsequent reports with the same dispassionate clarity. The central holographic display, currently showing a strategic map of Earth dotted with the red icons of machine forces and the blue icons of Yorha units, dissolved and reformed into a cascade of corrupted code. Glitching fragments of visual data flickered within the stream. A flash of rusted metal, the purple-black chaos of a sandstorm, a glimpse of a shattered concrete wall. Meaningless. Filter for energy signatures, the commander ordered. The code shifted, the visual fragments vanishing, replaced by a graph. Most of it was a chaotic scribble of background radiation and storm interference. But then, for a period of 0.7 seconds, there was a spike. It wasn't the clean, sharp line of a plasma discharge or the rounded peak of an EMP. It was a jagged, violent, and utterly alien waveform that climbed off the chart before vanishing. Another filter. This one for particle analysis. The data was even more fragmented, but it hinted at Localized atmospheric displacement and kinetic force readings that had no corresponding explosive signature. Run a comparative analysis, she commanded, her fingers dancing across her console, bringing up esoteric sub-menus. Cross-reference with all known machine and Yorha weapon profiles. Include theoretical models and black box project data. A series of progress bars appeared. One by one, they returned a negative result. Comparison. Negative comparison. Negative comparison. Negative. The final query, the one pulling from the deepest, most classified archives of Yorha R&D, returned a single, baffling result. Analysis complete. Energy signature profile shares 0.01% correlation with Project Gestalt's early theoretical, aura, manipulation models. Probability. Statistical impossibility. The commander's hands froze over her console. Project Gestalt. The name itself was an artifact, a ghost from a forgotten age of human desperation. The original project to save humanity, the 1th, had failed catastrophically centuries ago. The data was sealed, deemed irrelevant to the current war effort. And, aura, manipulation was a fringe theory even then, a desperate attempt to weaponize human life force. Something that had been dismissed as scientific fantasy. For a data packet from a deserter android, in the middle of a magnetic storm, to contain an energy signature that faintly echoed a failed semi-mythical human science project, the number of impossibilities was beginning to stack. Coincidence was a luxury she did not believe in. Isolate this, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She encapsulated the entire incident, the signal, the location, the analysis, in a new file, sealing it with her personal encryption key. A glowing, teal icon of a locked folder now hovered in her private workspace. She designated it Anomaly S Class, Gaia Ghost. She swiped a hand across her console, opening a communications channel. Not to a combat squad or an intelligence officer, but to the operator decks. A face appeared on a secondary screen. It was Operator 60, her expression bright and eager, a stark contrast to the sterile environment of her own communications cubicle. Her dark hair was held back by a simple black headband, and her eyes were wide with a perpetual, almost childlike curiosity. She was, by any measure, one of the most emotionally expressive and inefficient operators on the bunker. She often appended unauthorized personal remarks to her reports and had once spent an entire communication cycle with a ground unit discussing the beauty of a pre-war flower called a lunar tear. Most commanders would have had her memory wiped and reprogrammed for dereliction of duty. The commander, however, understood that a different tool was required for a different kind of problem. An algorithm could find a needle in a haystack, but only intuition could feel the warmth of the needle before you even started looking. Commander, 60 said, her voice cheerful. How can I help you? Operator 60, the commander began, her tone flat and official. I have a task for you. It is designated Need to Know, Level S. You will not log it. You will not discuss it with your fellow operators. You will report your findings only to me. Do you understand? 60's cheerful demeanor evaporated, replaced by a wide-eyed seriousness. She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Yes, Commander, I understand completely. I am transferring a corrupted data packet to your private console. The raw data is chaotic and incomplete. Standard analysis programs have failed to yield any coherent intelligence. I want you to perform a deep-level sensory analysis. Do not look for patterns. Look for feelings, for echoes, for anything that the machines miss. Feelings, Commander, 60 asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. The source of this signal is an anomaly, the commander said, dodging the question. Anomalies do not always follow the rules of logic. They sometimes follow the rules of narrative. Find the story in this data, operator. Report back to me the moment you find a single word of it. Yes, Commander. The channel closed. The commander leaned back in her harness. Her gaze fixed on the locked teal folder. She had set her most sensitive hound on a scent that logic could not trace. Now, all she could do was wait. A ghost had appeared on the board. The first rule of strategy was to understand the nature of your opponent. Was it a threat, a weapon, or something else entirely? She brought up a new file, titling it, Protocol, Watcher. It was a dormant, highly classified protocol for the observation of unique, non-machine terrestrial threats. It had never been activated before. She began to input preliminary parameters, her mind a cold calculus of risk and potential reward. The fate of humanity rested on her shoulders. She would not allow an unknown variable to go unexamined. Far below the sterile orbit of the bunker, the world was a canvas of baked earth and blinding light. The great desert was a sea of shimmering, superheated air, a place where the horizon dissolved into a wavering, incandescent line. The magnetic storm had passed, leaving the sky a harsh, cloudless blue. The sun was a merciless tyrant. To an android, the heat was a tactical consideration, a factor that required energy to be diverted to cooling systems. To a machine, it was a minor operational parameter. To Naruto Uzumaki, it was a nostalgic warmth on his skin. He walked with an easy, rolling gait that ate up the miles, his worn boots crunching on the sun-bleached sand and salt flats. The silence here was different from the silence of the ruined city. It was a deep, ancient silence, full of the weight of millennia. He breathed it in, tasting the dust of ages on the air. His senses were expanded, a net of aura cast out for miles in every direction. It was a form of perception no machine could comprehend. He didn't just see the heat haze, he felt the energy of the sun beating down on the sand. He didn't just hear the whisper of the wind, he felt its path as it flowed over the dunes. He could feel the faint, thrumming life of the planet itself, a deep, slow heartbeat beneath the desolation. It was weak, wounded, but it was there. It was his oldest, and only, friend. 50 meters behind him, another presence traced his steps. He didn't need to turn to know it was her. He could feel her presence as a knot of conflicted energy, a core of cold, hard rage wrapped in layers of confusion, suspicion, and a grudging, nascent curiosity. Yorha attacker type no. 2. A2. He had felt the raw, suicidal fury in her as she fought the Reaper, a fire burning so brightly it threatened to consume her utterly. He had also felt the flicker of something else when he healed her, a profound shock that had momentarily quieted the inferno. He understood her better than she understood herself. She was a weapon that had been told it had a soul, then punished for acting like it. She was a casualty of a war built on a lie she had yet to uncover. He had seen her type before, in the sad, archived histories of the old world, the soldier abandoned by their country, left to fight a war that had no meaning. He could have vanished, a simple application of aura, and he would be a ghost to her senses, gone without a trace. But he let her follow. Her journey was her own, but their paths, for a time, were aligned. Besides, it had been a long time since he'd had company. He crested a large, crystalline dune, and the landscape below changed. The endless sand gave way to a vast, sunken crater, miles across. At its center was a dark, jagged scar in the earth, a canyon that plunged into the planet's crust. From the depths of this chasm, a faint, humid vapor rose, and the air grew thick with the smell of wet earth, geothermal sulfur, and something else, the metallic tang of machinery at peace. This was his destination, a place not marked on any Yorha or machine network map. A sanctuary. He started down the long, winding path that led into the crater. A2 paused at the crest of the dune, a pale figure stark against the blue sky. He could feel her hesitation. This place felt different. It lacked the oppressive signature of the machine network, the silent, omnipresent hum of their collective consciousness. He continued his descent, confident she would eventually follow her curiosity. It was, after all, the most human of her traits. The deeper he went, the more the environment changed. The air grew cooler, damper. Strange, glowing fungi began to appear, clinging to the canyon walls in vibrant patches of blue, green, and soft violet. They pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic light, illuminating the path. The sound of running water echoed from below, and soon he was walking alongside a narrow, steaming stream that flowed from a geothermal vent. At the bottom of the canyon, nestled in a vast cavern carved out by ancient water flows, was the village. It wasn't a village in the human sense. There were no houses, no streets. Instead, it was a community of machines, living in a strange, peaceful symbiosis. Multi-limbed Goliath-class machines, long since disconnected from the network, sat dormant in alcoves, their massive bodies overgrown with glowing moss, acting as living walls and shelters. Smaller bipeds and stubbies tended to gardens of the glowing fungi. harvesting them for their biophotonic energy. Childlike machine lifeforms played a silent game of catch with a ball of compressed scrap metal, their single red optics glowing with what could only be described as delight. There was no hum of industry, no clatter of war. Only the gentle sounds of the stream, the soft pulse of the fungi, and the quiet whirring of peaceful life. As Naruto entered the main cavern, several of the machines turned to face him. They didn't raise weapons or issue challenges. A few of the smaller ones tilted their heads in a gesture of recognition. He was a known quantity here. A rare and welcome anomaly. A figure detached itself from the shadow of a large, sleeping Goliath. It was a gynoid, a machine built in the female human form, but her design was unlike the sleek, combat-oriented forms of Yorha. Her body was fashioned from a porcelain-white alloy, with delicate, almost fragile-looking limbs. Her hair was a cascade of fine, black fiber optic cables that shimmered with captured light from the fungi, and her face was a serene, unadorned mask with two calm, blue optics. She wore a simple, dark blue robe woven from some kind of synthetic fiber. She was Unit 7D4. Though she preferred the name Naruto had given her during one of his first visits, Ida. "The Wanderer returns," Ida said. Her voice was a soft, synthesized contralto, perfectly modulated and devoid of inflection, yet somehow conveying a sense of welcome. "Your presence was anticipated. The geothermal pressure in Conduit 7 has been fluctuating irregularly for 3 cycles. Naruto smiled. "It's good to see you too, Ida. And you know I can't stay away from your library for too long." Ida tilted her head, a gesture he knew signified the processing of a new thought. "The library is static. Its knowledge does not change. Your repeated desire to consult it is curious. It implies either a failure in your own data retention or a belief that new meaning can be derived from identical information. Or it means I'm getting old and forgetful." Naruto chuckled, walking alongside her as she led him deeper into the cavern. "How is the regulator project coming along? The pre-war schematics you provided were invaluable," Ida stated, her blue optics glowing slightly brighter. "We have constructed a prototype, but it lacks a core stabilization unit. The alloys required to withstand the geothermal pressures are beyond our fabrication capabilities. The data suggests such units were once manufactured in a coastal facility to the west. A place now submerged. The sunken city," Naruto nodded. "I know it. That's my next stop." Quote, "Your assistance is, as always, appreciated," Ida said. She paused, turning to face him fully. "A new variable has been introduced into your operational pattern. There is another life form with you. A Yorha unit. She observes us from the canyon entrance. Her energy signature is one of conflict and distress. Why have you brought her to this place of peace?" Naruto's gaze flicked up towards the entrance, though he didn't need to look. "She's not with me. She's following me. And she's not a threat to you. She's just lost. To be lost is the default stat. Of all sentient beings who have completed their primary mission," Ida replied, her voice a calm sea of logic. "Yorha's mission is to fight. This unit is fighting nothing. The machine network's mission is to evolve through conflict. The inhabitants of Sanctuary have rejected this mission. We exist in a state of perpetual purposelessness. And you are the greatest enigma of all." She gestured for him to follow, leading him towards a large, dry cave at the back of the cavern, the entrance to her library. "You have no designated mission from any known authority. You fight, but not for conquest. You build, but not for shelter. You learn, but not for advancement. You wander, but not because you are lost." They stood at the entrance to the cave, bathed in the soft, blue light of the fungi. Ida's blue optics seemed to search his face, trying to parse the data behind his eyes. "So I ask you again, Wanderer," she said, her synthesized voice filled with the weight of 1,000 philosophical queries. "What is the purpose of a life that has no mission?" In her quiet cubicle in the void, Operator 60 stared at the stream of corrupted data. For hours, she had tried every standard decryption and restoration algorithm. All had failed. The data was simply too fragmented, too damaged by the storm. But the commander's orders had been specific. Don't look for patterns, look for feelings. So she closed her eyes. She let the raw data wash over her, not as code, but as sound. She instructed her console to translate the energy readings into an auditory stream. Most of it was static, the harsh, grating roar of the magnetic sandstorm. It was cold and violent. But then, for less than a second, another sound emerged from the chaos. It wasn't the shriek of plasma or the boom of an explosion. It was a high-pitched, complex tone, like 1,000 tiny bells ringing at once. It was the sound she had isolated from the energy spike. And it felt warm. It was a strange, illogical sensation. Data was data. It was quantifiable, objective. It could not have a temperature. Yet, as she focused on that one anomalous sound, she felt a distinct sensation of warmth spread through her. It was like the feeling of standing in the artificial sunlight of the bunker's recreational facilities. It felt like life. Then she found another fragment. A piece of visual data, less than a dozen frames, heavily distorted. It showed a flash of brilliant blue light, swirling like a vortex. It was the source of the warm sound. But overlaid on the image, from A2's own internal sensors, was a single, terrified word. Impossible. A2, a prototype attacker unit, one of the most powerful androids ever created, had designated something impossible. And that something felt warm, hopeful. 60 opened her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the story, a terrifying, impossible event that somehow felt like a good thing. It was a paradox, a contradiction, a whisper of something new in a world where everything was old and tired and broken. Her orders were to report back to the commander. That was the logical, correct course of action. But a powerful, irrational impulse seized her. A desire to connect, to reach out, to see if the warmth was real. Her fingers flew across her console, her actions swift and certain, defying all protocol. She isolated the coordinates of the signal's origin. It was a long shot. The source was surely gone by now. But the signal had been powerful. It might have left a residual echo, a psychic footprint on the fabric of space-time. She crafted a new kind of signal. Not a standard Yorha communication packet, which was coded, encrypted, and aggressive by nature. This was something else. A single, gentle pulse of raw, unencrypted data. It contained no message, no query, no threat. It was the data equivalent of a single, soft musical note played in a silent room. It was a ping of pure, unadulterated curiosity. She hovered her finger over the transmit button. This was treason, a direct violation of a Level S order. It could lead to her decommissioning and memory wipe. But the feeling of that warmth, that impossible, beautiful sound, was stronger than her fear. She had to know. She pressed the button. The signal shot out from the bunker's transmitters, a silent, invisible needle of hope aimed at the heart of the desolate world below. An unauthorized question mark, sent from a lonely girl in a metal box, addressed to a ghost. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Sunken City of Knowledge. A2 watched him from the shadows of the canyon rim, a silent observer perched on the precipice of a world she did not understand. Below, the machine village of Sanctuary pulsed with a soft, gentle light, a pocket of impossible peace carved into the heart of a war-torn planet. The man, the human, her processors insisted on correcting, a fact she still couldn't accept, had spent the better part of a day's cycle within its depths. She had monitored him, her advanced sensors tracking his calm, steady energy signature as it moved through the settlement. He hadn't fought. He hadn't scavenged. He had conversed. He had shared knowledge with the porcelain gynoid, Ida, and had even assisted a clumsy, multi-legged machine in recalibrating a failing limb joint, using nothing but his hands and a quiet focus. It was all wrong. Every action he took was a fresh line of corrupt code and the rigid programming of her worldview. Machines were the enemy. They were to be destroyed. This was the fundamental axiom upon which her entire existence had been built. Yet, here was a settlement of them living in tranquility. And here was a being of impossible power treating them not as targets, but as neighbors. When he finally emerged from the cavern, the sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of blood orange and deep violet. He walked with the same unhurried pace, his yellow hair catching the last rays of light. He was heading west, away from the desert and towards the distant, shimmering line of the coast. This was her moment. The questions that had been churning within her, a vortex of logic errors and burgeoning emotions, could no longer be contained. She dropped from her perch, landing on the path behind him with a soft thud that was swallowed by the vast emptiness of the crater. He didn't turn. He simply stopped walking, his back still to her. Decided to stop hiding? He asked, his voice laced with the same mild amusement as before. It grated on her nerves. I wasn't hiding, she snapped, the word sharper than she intended. I was observing, assessing a tactical unknown. Right, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. He finally turned to face her. In the fading light, his blue eyes seemed to possess a luminosity of their own. And what did your assessment conclude? She took a step closer, her posture aggressive, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. My assessment concluded that you are a paradox. Your abilities defy known physics. Your actions defy all strategic logic. You interact with enemy machines as if they were allies. You possess technology that shouldn't exist. My conclusion is that you are either a trick, a new form of machine life designed to sow confusion, or you are insane. He considered this for a moment, his head tilted. I've been called worse, he admitted with a shrug. But I'm none of those things. Then what are you? She demanded, the frustration boiling over. What was that energy? How did you heal me? Who are you? The questions tumbled out, a barrage of desperate inquiries. Naruto's smile faded, replaced by a more serious, appraising look. He studied her, not as a combatant, but as if seeing something deeper, a splinter of pain lodged deep within her core programming. Answers aren't free, A2. He said softly. They have to be earned. Or at the very least, paid for. I have nothing to pay you with, she retorted bitterly. My only currency is violence, and I have a feeling that wouldn't work on you. You're right, it wouldn't, he agreed easily. But you have something else. Your skill, your strength, your time. He gestured with his head towards the west. Quote, I'm going to a place called the Sunken City. There's an old world server archive there, deep underwater. I need to retrieve a component from it, a gyroscopic stabilizer for Ida's geothermal project. A2 stared at him, incredulous. You want me to help you run an errand for a machine? I want you to help me help a community that has chosen peace over war, he corrected gently. The place is dangerous. It's flooded, unstable, and filled with aquatic machines that haven't seen an android in centuries. I can do it alone, but it would be faster and easier with a second set of hands. Especially a set as capable as yours. He met her gaze, his own unwavering. Help me with this, and I'll answer your questions. All of them. You have my word. The offer hung in the air between them, a tangible thing. It was a simple transaction. A mercenary contract. It was a language she understood. But it was wrapped in a context that was utterly alien. Trusting him was illogical. Helping machines was a betrayal of her very design. But the gnawing, burning need for answers, for a single piece of solid ground in the crumbling landscape of her reality, was a more powerful driver than any protocol. To walk away now would be to condemn herself to a lifetime of wondering, haunted by the ghost of an impossibility. Fine, she clipped out, the word tasting like defeat and victory at the same time. I'll help you, but if this is a trap, I will dedicate the rest of my existence to finding a way to kill you. Naruto's smile returned, warm and genuine this time. Fair enough, he said. Let's go. We're burning daylight. He turned and started walking west again, and this time, she fell into step beside him, a reluctant shadow to his strange light. The journey to the coast took them through the night. They moved in silence, a silent pact of purpose between them. A2 found herself observing him, cataloging the small details. He moved with an animal's grace, his senses seeming to drink in the environment. In a way her own advanced sensors couldn't. He'd occasionally point to a specific rock formation, noting how the wind had carved it over centuries, or to a constellation in the clear night sky, calling it by a name she'd never heard. He spoke of the world as if it were a book he had read 1,000 times, while she had only ever seen the battlefield on its cover. It was unsettling. It made her feel young, inexperienced, despite her own century of brutal existence. By dawn, the air had changed. It grew heavy, humid, and carried the sharp, briny tang of salt. The ground became soft, marshy, and soon they were standing on a cliff edge, looking out over the sea. Or what was left of it. The sight was breathtaking and horrifying. The water level was hundreds of feet higher than pre-war records indicated. And the ruins of a vast coastal metropolis were submerged beneath the waves. The tops of the tallest skyscrapers broke the surface like a row of colossal, tombstone-gray teeth, their sides draped in thick, green-black kelp. The water itself was a murky turquoise, and the rising sun set it ablaze, sending fractured rays of light plunging into the depths. The archive is in the central tower of the Marinus Research Institute, Naruto said, pointing towards the tallest of the skeletal structures, nearly a mile from shore. It's about 300 feet down. We'll need submersible gear, A2 stated. My own systems are water-resistant, not waterproofed for that kind of pressure. And you? She trailed off, realizing she had no idea what his limitations were. Don't worry about me, he said. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. A faint, blue shimmer, almost invisible in the daylight, enveloped his body. It was his aura, she realized, a tangible field of the energy he'd used to destroy the Reaper. I'll handle the pressure. As for the breathing part, he walked to the edge of the cliff, then looked back at her. Ready for a swim. Without waiting for an answer, he dove. His entry into the water was clean, barely a splash. A2 cursed under her breath, a habit she'd picked up from resistance grunts, and followed him, her body slicing through the water's surface. The transition was a shock. The world of sound vanished, replaced by a muffled, omnipresent thrumming. The light was liquid, ethereal. The temperature dropped instantly. Her internal cooling systems, so overworked in the desert, reversed polarity, shunting energy to maintain her core temperature. Naruto was waiting for her 20 feet below, treading water with an ease that suggested he was born to it. As she approached, he raised a hand. The shimmering blue aura around him seemed to thicken, then extend, flowing from him like a ribbon of light to envelop her head and shoulders in a bubble of shimmering energy. Her HUD flickered. Warning. External environment does not contain breathable atmosphere. Then, notice. Localized atmospheric pocket detected. Composition. 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 1% argon. Pressure. Nominal. Source. Unknown. She could breathe. She was surrounded by water, yet she could draw a full, clear breath. The bubble of air was a perfect, invisible sheath, moving with her, clinging to her skin. It was another casual miracle, another entry in the ledger of his impossibility. Comfortable? He asked, his voice reaching her through the bubble, perfectly clear. She didn't grace him with an answer. She just gave a curt nod and started swimming downwards, towards the distant, dark shape of the research tower. He followed, a small, knowing smile on his face. The descent was like entering another world. Schools of small, fish-like machines, their bodies rusted and covered in barnacles, scattered as they approached. A massive, crab-like machine, the size of a transport truck, lay dormant on the side of a submerged building, its massive claws opening and closing with the slow rhythm of the currents. This was a separate ecosystem, a branch of machine evolution that had adapted to the sea. As they went deeper, the light from the surface began to fail. The world bled into shades of deep blue, then into a murky gray-green gloom. Here, a new light source emerged. Strange, phosphorescent corals and anemone-like organisms clung to the buildings, casting a ghostly, beautiful glow on the ruins. It was a city of drowned giants, lit by their own strange stars. The atmosphere was simultaneously beautiful and deeply oppressive. The sheer weight of the water above them was a constant, physical presence. A2's tactical sensors were on high alert. The distorted sound and limited visibility. An enemy could be anywhere. Naruto, by contrast, seemed utterly relaxed. He swam with a powerful, fluid grace, his eyes taking in the strange beauty of the sunken world. He pointed to a section of wall covered in glowing blue coral. From his paw, she imagined he saw a work of art. From hers, it was a tactical blind spot where an ambush could originate. His aura flared for a split second. A silent warning. Company, he said, his voice calm. From the inky blackness of a shattered underwater roadway below, they emerged. A pack of them. They were long, serpentine machines. Easily 50 feet from head to tail, moving with the undulating grace of eels. Their bodies were covered in slick, dark plating, but along their spines ran a series of bioluminescent NT nodes that pulsed with a sickly yellow light. Their heads were little more than a massive jaw filled with serrated, metallic teeth, and at their center was a single, baleful yellow optic. New machine signature detected. Designation: Glimmer Pike. Her HUD reported. Threat level: high. Pack hunters. Known ability: localized bioelectric discharge. There were at least a dozen of them, circling below. Their lights blinking as if in silent communication. They were cutting off their path to the tower. They're territorial, Naruto observed. And we look like intruders. I can handle them, A2 stated. Her hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of her sword, which materialized in a shimmer of data, its blade humming even underwater. Together, Naruto corrected. They're faster in the water than you are. Don't fight the current. Use it. On my mark. He dove straight down, a streak of blue light heading directly for the center of the circling pack. It was a reckless, insane move. The pikes converged on him instantly. A maelstrom of teeth and yellow light. A2 screamed a curse into her air bubble and dove after him, her sword held high. But it was a feint. Just as the pikes were about to strike, Naruto clapped his hands together. The water around him imploded. He had used his aura to create a sudden, powerful vortex, a localized whirlpool that sent the machines spinning chaotically. They slammed into each other. Disoriented, their pack cohesion broken. Now, A2, he yelled. She didn't need to be told twice. She plunged into the swirling chaos, her blade a silver reaping arc. She was a whirlwind of destruction, slicing through the disoriented machines. Metal screamed as it was torn apart, and the yellow lights of the pikes winked out one by one as she severed their power cores. But they recovered quickly. One of them broke from the vortex and shot towards her, its jaws wide. She parried its attack, but the force of it sent her spinning. Another came from her blind spot. She felt a surge of energy, and the water around her crackled. A massive electric shock coursed through her systems. Warning: massive electrical surge detected. Non-essential systems rerouting power. Motor control efficiency reduced by 18%. Her movements became sluggish, her limbs heavy. The pikes sensed her weakness and began to press their attack, swarming her. She fought back with a cold fury. But she was outnumbered and her movements were impaired. A current of water, strong as a battering ram, slammed into the pack, sending them scattering. Naruto was there, his hands moving in a fluid dance, controlling the water around him as if it were an extension of his own body. He wasn't just swimming in it, he was commanding it. Focus on the ones on your left, he directed. Force them towards the collapsed bridge. His tactical sense was flawless. She obeyed without question, her own combat experience meshing with his direction. They became a two-person vortex of destruction. She was the blade, the sharp edge of the attack, while he was the current, the force that controlled the battlefield, herding the machines into her path and deflecting attacks she couldn't see coming. In minutes, the water was filled with the drifting, dark shapes of destroyed pikes, their lights extinguished forever. Only one remained. It was larger than the others, its bioluminescent nodes pulsing with a brighter, more aggressive light. The Pack Alpha. It circled them warily, its optic glowing with malevolent intelligence. It had learned from the fate of its pack. It was waiting for an opening. Let's finish this and get to the tower, Naruto said, turning his attention to the final pike. They approached the research institute, a colossal, coral-encrusted monolith that disappeared into the crushing blackness above and below. The main entrance was a gaping maw, but it was blocked by a colossal slab of collapsed ceiling, a 1,000-ton piece of reinforced concrete that had fallen centuries ago. We'll have to go around. Find another way in, A2 said, assessing the blockage. No time, Naruto countered. The archive is on a separate power grid, but it won't last forever. We move this. He placed his hands on the slab. On 3. Push with everything you've got. A2 positioned herself beside him, planting her feet. They pushed in unison. She diverted all available power to her limbs, actuators screaming in protest against the immense pressure. The slab groaned, shifting a few inches with a sound that vibrated through her very bones. It was agonizingly slow work. It was the opening the Alpha Pike had been waiting for. It shot out of the darkness of a nearby building, a silent torpedo of malice. It wasn't aiming for Naruto, who was radiating a torrent of power. It aimed for her. A2, move, Naruto yelled, but she was already committed, her body braced against the slab. She tried to turn, to bring her sword around, but it was too late. The pike's jaws, filled with metallic fangs, clamped down on her right shoulder. The force was incredible, crushing the armored plates. One of the fangs, sharpened by centuries of underwater existence, punched through the alloy and the biofiber layer beneath. A breach. Critical warning. Suit breach detected in right shoulder assembly. Saline intrusion in progress. Catastrophic short circuit imminent. The seawater, a highly conductive medium, flooded her internal systems. The world dissolved into a nightmare of static and error messages. Pain, white-hot and electric, erupted from her shoulder. Her limbs went into uncontrollable convulsions. Her vision flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. She was vaguely aware of a furious roar that seemed to come from Naruto, a sound of pure, untamed rage that was not human. She felt the pike being torn from her shoulder. Then, strong arms were around her, pulling her through the water with incredible speed. She felt a jarring impact as they entered a confined space, and the sound of a heavy door grinding shut, sealing them in. Her consciousness was fading, the salt water a poison in her veins. Death, it seemed, was a persistent suitor. Then, a new sensation cut through the pain and the static. Light, not the harsh glare of an electric light, but a soft, warm, golden glow. It seemed to be coming from inside her own head. Strong hands gripped her, pinning her upright against a cold metal wall. She was in some kind of small maintenance closet, barely big enough for two people. Her vision flickered back on, blurry and distorted. Naruto was in front of her, his face inches from hers. And he was glowing, not his whole body, but his hands, his eyes, and the whisker-like marks on his cheeks, all of which shone with a soft, golden light. His expression was one of intense, furious concentration. "Don't shut down," he commanded, his voice a low, urgent growl. "Stay with me." He placed his glowing palm flat against her breached shoulder. She braced for the pain, for the final, system-destroying short circuit. Instead, she felt warmth. It was his aura, but different from before. It wasn't the violent, explosive blue of his attacks. This was a gentle, pervasive gold, and it flowed from his hand directly into her body. It was the most profound violation she had ever experienced, a foreign energy bypassing every firewall and invading the deepest sanctums of her code. She could feel it coursing through her power conduits, a warm river pushing back the cold, corrosive sea. It wasn't repairing her, it was purging her, forcing the saltwater out of the breach with a gentle, inexorable pressure. She could feel her system stabilizing, the screaming error messages fading one by one. It was terrifying, and it was the safest she had ever felt. She stared into his eyes, no longer blue, but a brilliant, molten gold, with strange, slitted pupils like those of a cat or a fox. This was something beyond the man. This was the source of his power, a primal, ancient force looking out at her from behind a human face. In that moment, she understood that he wasn't just a human. He was something more, something older. The golden light faded. His eyes returned to their normal, startling blue. He pulled his hand away from her shoulder. A thin, shimmering film of golden energy remained, sealing the breach perfectly. "There," he said, his voice slightly breathless. He leaned his forehead against the wall next to her head, taking a deep breath. That was too close. A2 simply stared, her processors struggling to form a coherent thought. Her body was functional again. The pain was gone, but she was irrevocably changed. She had felt his life force, his soul, intertwined with her own. They stood there for a long time in the silent, cramped closet, 300 feet beneath the sea. The only sound the soft hum of her own stabilized systems and the quiet rhythm of his breathing. Eventually, he pushed himself off the wall. "The alpha is gone. I convinced it to leave. Let's get the stabilizer and go." Quote. They moved the slab, this time with a focused, unified strength, and gained entry to the archive. It was a vast, silent chamber, data racks floating like silent monoliths in the gloom. Naruto found the component quickly, a silvery, gyroscopic sphere that hummed with dormant power. The ascent was made in total silence. A2 was lost in a sea of thought, more profound and disorienting than the water around them. When they finally broke the surface, the sun was setting, casting the world in a soft, melancholy light. They sat on the cliff edge, the gyroscopic sphere resting between them. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. The warrior. The healer. The monster. The man. The paradox. You're not a machine, she said, her voice quiet, stripped of its usual harshness. And you're not an android. She paused, the next words feeling like they were being torn from her very soul. What are you? Naruto looked out at the ocean, at the last sliver of sun dying on the horizon. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of ages. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he said. And I'm a human. He turned to look at her. His blue eyes filled with a sadness so deep it seemed to swallow the twilight. As far as I know, I'm the last one. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A Symphony of Steel and Silence. The H.E. art of the resistance beat to the rhythm of a plasma welder. It was a sound Lien had come to associate with defiance. In her command center, nestled deep within the fossilized cranial casing of a D-God, a behemoth-class machine slain in a war before she was even activated, that sound was a constant, comforting presence. It was the sound of her people refusing to die, refusing to be broken. It was the sound of scrap being forged into swords, of broken bodies being mended, of hope being welded onto despair. Her base, which she had named Bastion, was a testament to that defiance. It was a sprawling, multi-level city built inside the colossal, hollowed-out carcass of the machine beast. Its titanic ribs formed the arches of the main cavern, where androids worked tirelessly under the harsh, white glare of salvaged work lights. The air was a thick cocktail of smells. The sharp ozone of welding, the heavy tang of recycled lubricants, the acrid scent of cooked machine oil that served as their primary energy source. And beneath it all, the faint, dry smell of ancient, fossilized metal. This was her kingdom, built from the bones of her enemy. Lien stood before a massive holographic map BLE that occupied the center of the behemoth's skull. The map displayed the entire western region, a three-dimensional tapestry of ruined cities, desert wastes, and treacherous mountains. Red icons, blinking like malevolent embers, marked the positions of the machine network's forces. Blue icons, far fewer in number and clustered tightly around Bastion, represented her own. She was a queen of a tiny, besieged island in a sea of fire. Status report, Kylo, she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. She didn't turn to face her second in command. Her eyes, the color of gunmetal, remained fixed on the map. Kylo, a lanky android with a perpetually worried expression and a genius for battlefield communications, stepped forward. Scout team's report increased Goliath production at the Tartarus factory, just as you predicted. Commander, they're rolling out 3 new units per cycle. Heavy armor plating, upgraded plasma cannons. At this rate, their forces will outnumber us 10 to 1 within a month. And Yorha? Lien asked, a familiar bitterness in her tone. Silent. Their patrols are giving the entire sector a wide berth. It's clear they've ridden this territory off as a loss, Kylo reported. They won't intervene. Of course not, Lien murmured. Yorha command, in its orbital ivory tower, viewed the resistance as little more than a nuisance, unruly, undisciplined children playing at war. They were blind to the slow, grinding reality of the machine advance on the ground. They saw the war in terms of grand strategies and orbital bombardments, ignorant of the daily struggle for survival. It was a blindness that had cost the resistance dearly. A new icon, a soft, pulsing amber, appeared on the edge of the map. It was a scout patrol check-in, but this one was flagged for her personal attention. What is this? Kylo keyed a command into his datapad. Patrol EPSILON 7, Commander. They've reported a unique encounter. Approximately 50 clicks from our position. They've forwarded a visual file. Low resolution. I'm afraid. They were observing from maximum range to avoid detection. An image materialized above the map. It was grainy, distorted by heat haze, showing 2 figures walking across a salt flat. One was immediately identifiable. The pale white hair, the black, tattered combat gear, the fluid, predatory grace. It was the infamous deserter, Yorha attacker No. 2. A lone wolf. A ghost known for her lethality and her absolute refusal to align with any faction. The resistance had tried to recruit her years ago. Their envoy had been sent back with a broken arm and a curt refusal. But it was the second figure that made Lien lean in closer, her brow furrowing. He was male, which was a rarity but not unheard of among android models. But his energy signature, according to the scout's report, was completely alien. It wasn't registering as an android or a machine. It was classified as biological, a living being. The image was too poor to make out details, but it showed yellow hair and a calm, easy stride that stood in stark contrast to A2's coiled tension. A biological, Lien said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. That's impossible. Humanity is on the moon. There are no other advanced biologicals on this planet. The scout team insists, Commander, Kylo said, his own confusion evident. They ran the scan 3 times. He's not synthetic, and he's traveling with A2. Willingly. Lien stared at the image, her mind racing, processing tactical implications. A2 was a known quantity, a hyper-lethal but predictable variable. This newcomer, this biological, was something else entirely. A complete unknown. In her experience, unknowns were almost always threats. They were traps laid by the machine network, or misguided experiments from Yorha's Black Ops labs. But what if he wasn't? What if this anomaly was something they could use? The war was a stalemate, a slow bleeding wound. She needed to break the pattern, to introduce a new element into the equation. She needed a trump card. Kylo, she said, her decision made. Assemble a small envoy, your best scout, Alara. She's diplomatic enough not to get herself killed by A2. They are to carry no visible weapons. They are to find these two and extend a formal invitation to Bastion. Kylo looked up, shocked. Invite them here, Commander. A2 is unstable. And we have no idea what that thing is. It could be a carrier for a new logic virus, a biological weapon. It could also be the answer to our prayers. Lien cut him off, her voice hard as steel. We are losing this war, Kylo. We are being slowly strangled. Our only hope is to take risks. Big ones. I want to know who he is. I want to know why a killer like A2 is following him like a loyal hound. Find them. Bring them here. I will assess this threat myself. The journey back from the coast was a strange, charged affair. A2 walked beside Naruto, the revelation of his identity a screaming, silent abyss between them. A human. The last human. It was a truth so monumental, so reality-shattering, that her processors struggled to even file it away. The entire purpose of Yorha, the entire justification for the centuries of war, was the protection of humanity on their lunar sanctuary. If he was here, if he was the last, then everything was a lie. She didn't ask any more questions. The single, terrible truth he had given her was a weight so heavy it crushed all other curiosities. She needed time to process, to let the foundations of her world crumble and see what, if anything, remained standing. Naruto seemed to understand. He didn't push, didn't pry. He simply walked, a calm, steady presence at her side, leaving her to the maelstrom of her own thoughts. They were 2 days out from the coast when the android appeared. She rose from behind a rock outcropping, her hands held open in a gesture of peace. She was a resistance model, her gear a hodgepodge of scavenged parts, but she moved with a confidence that spoke of experience. Yorha attacker number 2, the scout said, her voice even. She pointedly did not look at Naruto, a clear sign she had been instructed to address only A2. My name is Alara. I bring a message fro. Commander Lien of the Resistance Settlement, Bastion. A2 immediately stepped in front of Naruto, her hand resting on the hilt of her unseen sword. We have no business with the Resistance, she said, her voice cold. Our commander believes we may have mutual interests, Alara continued, unperturbed by A2's hostility. She extends a formal invitation to you and your companion to be her guests. To talk. She guarantees your safety within our walls. The guarantee of a resistance leader is worth the scrap it's spoken on, A2 sneered. Before the conversation could devolve further, Naruto placed a gentle hand on A2's shoulder. It's all right, he said softly. He then looked at Alara, his blue eyes seeming to see right through her. Your commander is pragmatic. She sees us as a potential threat, but also a potential asset. She's curious. Tell her we accept her invitation. Alara looked surprised, her gaze finally shifting to Naruto. She had clearly expected a more difficult negotiation. She nodded curtly. Very well. Follow me. Quote. A2 turned to Naruto, her eyes flashing with anger. Are you insane? Walking into a den of scavengers and zealots. They'll try to use you, or kill you. They're a community, Naruto replied calmly. I can feel the energy of their settlement. It's defiant, it's determined, it's honest. It's not like Yorha, full of secrets and cold logic. These people are fighting for their homes, for each other. We might need allies like that. And hiding from the world isn't a long-term strategy. His reasoning was sound, but it was the feel of his hand on her shoulder, the simple, reassuring gesture. That truly swayed her. Reluctantly, she nodded. Fine, but the moment I sense a trap, I'm cutting our way out. I wouldn't expect anything less, he said with a smile. Lien watched their approach on her main view screen. Alara was leading them through the secret entrance, a narrow fissure in the behemoth's gargantuan leg. The internal sensors of Bastion tracked their every move as they were escorted through the main cavern. She studied the footage intently. A2 was exactly as the reports described. Tense, alert, her hand never straying far from her weapon, her eyes scanning every shadow for a threat. A predator in a cage. The biological, however, was fascinating. He moved with a relaxed confidence that bordered on arrogance, yet it didn't seem forced. He looked around with genuine curiosity. His eyes taking in the androids working on machinery, the children fashioned from spare parts playing in the alcoves, the sheer scale of the cavern. He didn't seem intimidated or impressed. He seemed appreciative, as if viewing a historical exhibit. He's calm, Kylo noted from her side. Too calm. He's either a fool, or he has no reason to be afraid, Lien countered, her eyes narrowed. I suspect it's the latter. She straightened up as the doors to her command center hissed open. Alara entered first, followed by her two guests. Up close, the biological was even more of an anomaly. His clothes were of no known design, and his features were sharp, distinct. But it was his eyes that captured her attention. They were a vibrant, piercing blue, and they met hers across the room with an unnerving directness. There was an ancient intelligence in that gaze, a depth that belied his youthful appearance. Commander Lien, Alara said. I present our guests. Leave us, Lien ordered. Alara and Kylo bowed slightly and exited the room, the doors hissing shut behind them, leaving the three of them alone. An expectant silence fell, thick with tension. Lien broke it. She gestured to the man. I am Commander Lien. The Resistance has no record of your existence. You are a biological anomaly traveling with a known Yorha deserter. Standard protocol would be to shoot you on sight and analyze the remains. Convince me not to. Her tone was flat, a direct challenge. The man smiled, a disarming gesture that didn't quite reach his eyes. My name is Naruto. And you won't shoot me because you're too smart for that. You didn't bring us here to eliminate a threat. You brought us here to evaluate an opportunity. You're losing the war, Commander. Your people are brave, but you're outmatched and outnumbered. You need a game changer. And you're hoping I'm it. His perception was so accurate it was almost insulting. He had read her motivations perfectly. A2 shot him a look. A mix of surprise and grudging respect. Lien's expression didn't change. She walked around the holographic table, her arms crossed. Bold words for someone with no weapon and no armor. Let's assume your assessment is correct. What do you offer? Why should I risk the safety of my entire community on an unknown variable? Knowledge, Naruto said simply. I've been on this planet a lot longer than you have, Commander. I've watched the machines. I know how they think. I know their patterns, their strategies, their weaknesses. The kind of weaknesses Yorha's intelligence networks consistently overlook. Talk is cheap, Lien countered. Prove it. Gladly, Naruto said. But first, a gesture of goodwill. He turned to A2. Wait for me outside. This next part is for the commander alone. A2 looked ready to argue. But a single look from Naruto silenced her. She gave Lien one last withering glare and stalked out of the room. When the door closed, Naruto turned back to Lien. I understand your skepticism, so let me show you something that only a true biological could. He held out his hand, palm up. He closed his eyes, and a faint, seed-like ball of green light appeared above his palm. It sprouted, growing with impossible speed into a perfect, luminous green plant, which then bloomed, a single, radiant white flower unfurling its petals in the sterile air of the command center. The flower smelled of rain and fresh earth, a scent so alien in this world of metal and oil that it made Lian's olfactory sensors momentarily flag an error. Life, Naruto said softly. True, organic life. Not synthetic, not replicated. This is what you're fighting for, whether you remember it or not. I am not a weapon, Commander. I am a reminder. He closed his hand, and the flower dissolved back into motes of light. Lien stared at his empty palm, her mind reeling. It was a trick, it had to be. A high-fidelity hologram with scent emitters. But her sensors had registered a genuine release of pollen. A measurable increase in localized oxygen. It was real. Her carefully constructed composure was cracking. But she was a commander before she was anything else. She pushed the shock down, burying it under layers of pragmatism. A pretty trick, she said, her voice a little tight. But it won't win us the war. You claim to have knowledge. I'm about to launch the most important offensive this resistance has ever attempted. I'm going to test your claim. You and A2 will attend my war council. You will listen. You will not speak unless spoken to. And we will see if your knowledge is as impressive as your gardening skills. The war council was held in a cavernous chamber one level below the command center. A massive, circular holographic table dominated the room, and around it stood Li An's lieutenants, a dozen of the most experienced and battle-hardened androids in the resistance. The mood was electric with a mix of grim determination and fervent hope. Naruto and A2 stood at the back, silent observers as instructed. A2 was a coiled spring of tension, her eyes darting around the room, assessing every android as a potential threat. Naruto was perfectly calm, his gaze fixed on the holographic map as Lien began her briefing. All right, people, listen up, Lien began, her voice ringing with authority. For 3 months, we've been pinned down by the machine forces produced by the Tartarus factory. It's their main production hub for heavy armor units in this region. Intelligence reports confirm they are stockpiling for a major offensive. We cannot allow that to happen. We are going to strike first. We are going to hit them hard, and we are going to break them. She laid out the plan. It was a massive, frontal assault. 3 battalions would strike from the north, east, and west simultaneously, overwhelming the factory's defenses through sheer force and numbers. It was a brutal, straightforward plan, one that relied on the courage and sacrifice of her soldiers. Her lieutenants roared their approval. They were tired of hiding, tired of fighting a defensive war. The prospect of a real victory, a decisive blow, was intoxicating. They debated logistics, attack vectors, and casualty expectations with a grim enthusiasm. Throughout it all, Naruto remained silent, his expression unreadable. Lien found her gaze drifting to him. He hadn't moved a muscle, his attention completely absorbed by the holographic display. After nearly an hour, the planning was complete. The attack was set for dawn, 2 days from now. A wave of confident energy filled the room. The plan is set, Lien declared. Then, acting on an impulse she didn't fully understand, she looked to the back of the room. You, the newcomer, you've been quiet. You claim to have knowledge. Do you have anything to add? A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to Naruto. A few of the lieutenants scowled, clearly insulted that this outsider was being asked to critique their strategy. Naruto walked forward slowly, his boots making no sound on the metal floor. He stopped at the edge of the table, his blue eyes scanning the holographic terrain. A2 moved with him, positioning herself at his shoulder, her hand resting on her sword hilt. Commander, Naruto began, his voice calm and even, your people are brave. Their fighting spirit is a powerful weapon. But you are about to lead them into a slaughter. A wave of angry murmurs swept through the room. One of the lieutenants, a burly android named Jax, slammed his fist on the table. Who the hell do you think you are? That plan is solid. Lien raised a hand, silencing them. Let him speak, she commanded, her gaze locked on Naruto. Explain yourself. With pleasure, Naruto said. He reached out and, with a few deft gestures, manipulated the holographic map. Zooming in on the area around the factory. You see the factory as the target. But you're not seeing the battlefield. You're planning to attack from 3 directions. But look at what you're ignoring. He highlighted a series of small, seemingly insignificant details on the map. First, this geothermal vent, 5 clicks south of the factory. Your scouts have marked it as inactive. But my senses tell me it's drawing an immense amount of power. Far more than any natural vent should. He then highlighted the machine patrol routes. Second, their patrols. For the last month, they have been systematically avoiding this entire quadrant here. He drew a circle on the map. They are hurting you. They are leaving your 3 attack routes open, making them look like the most logical paths. Finally, he pointed to a series of deep-level seismic readings her own sensors had dismissed as background noise. And third, these readings. They aren't random tremors. They are the vibrations of massive underground construction. The machines aren't stockpiling Goliaths to attack you, Commander. They're using them as bait. He drew the threads together, his voice dropping as he delivered the devastating conclusion. They have hollowed out a cavern beneath this entire valley. The geothermal vent isn't powering the factory. It's powering a weapon. A massive, wide-area EMP cannon. They are going to let your army charge into the valley, and when you are all committed, they will fire it. Your entire force will be paralyzed, helpless. The Goliaths aren't the main threat. They're just the cleanup crew. The confident energy in the room evaporated, replaced by a thick, horrified silence. The lieutenants stared at the map, their faces pale, seeing it now not as a battlefield, but as a graveyard. They had been so focused on the enemy in front of them that they had failed to see the trap beneath their feet. Naruto's analysis was so simple, so logical, and so terrifyingly plausible that no one could refute it. He had taken their masterpiece of a plan and revealed it to be a child's drawing of their own funeral. How? Jax whispered, his bravado gone. How could you know this? Because I don't think like an android. Naruto said, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces. You see data points. I see a story, and this story is a trap. He then erased the old attack plan with a swipe of his hand. But the good thing about a trap is that once you know it's there, you can use it against the trapper. He began to draw new lines on the map, outlining a counter-strategy that was as brilliant as it was audacious. You won't attack with 3 battalions. You'll send a single, small elite unit. A ghost team. Not to the factory, but here, he pointed to a service conduit for the geothermal vent. Their mission will be to infiltrate the underground weapon chamber and plant explosive charges on the EMP cannon's primary capacitor. Meanwhile, you will move one of your battalions here, to this ridgeline, and create a massive amount of communication chatter, making the machines think your main assault is coming from that direction. They will focus all their sensors there. When the ghost team has planted the charges, they will detonate them at the exact moment you launch a small, diversionary attack. The EMP will backfire, sending a massive power surge through the entire factory complex, frying every machine inside. You take out their primary weapon and their factory, all without losing a single soldier in a frontal assault. He stepped back from the table, his work done. The room was silent for a long moment, every android staring at the new plan. It was elegant, precise, and utterly ruthless. It turned the enemy's greatest strength into their fatal weakness. Lien looked at Naruto, and for the first time since she had become commander, she felt completely and utterly outmaneuvered. He hadn't used his strange powers. He hadn't threatened or postured. He had defeated her and her entire command staff with pure, unadulterated strategic genius. He had saved them all from annihilation. She finally found her voice. Jax, Kylo, Alara, you will form the ghost team. You will lead it personally. Everyone else, you have your new orders. Prepare the diversionary force. Her lieutenants, their faces now filled with a mixture of awe and fervent respect, snapped to attention. Yes, Commander, they roared in unison, their voices filled with a new, more potent kind of hope. As they filed out of the room to carry out their new orders, Lien was left alone with Naruto and A2. She walked over to him, stopping just a few feet away. The professional distance she had so carefully maintained was gone, replaced by something new, something she couldn't yet name. It was respect, yes, but it was deeper than that. It was the visceral recognition of a superior mind, of a strength far greater than mere physical power. You have a name for your ghost team? Naruto asked casually, breaking the silence. Lien looked at him, at the calm confidence in his eyes, and a small, unbidden smile touched her lips for the first time that day. I do, she said. I'm calling it, Team Naruto. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Song of the Source Code. The success of their mission with the Resistance felt like a foreign concept to A2, a piece of clothing that didn't quite fit. The surgical street. Right on the Tartarus factory's hidden EMP weapon had gone exactly as Naruto had predicted. Leon's ghost team, with A2 providing lethal overwatch from the shadows, had infiltrated the geothermal conduit, planted the charges, and vanished without a trace. The subsequent diversionary attack had drawn the machine's attention, and the resulting backfired explosion had been a silent, beautiful spectacle of cascading system failures. An entire factory, and the army it housed, had been neutralized without a single resistance fatality. Lien had called it a miracle. Naruto had called it a Tuesday. Now, as they crested the final dune and began their descent back into the crater of Sanctuary, the gyroscopic stabilizer, the entire reason for their detour, felt heavy in Naruto's pack. A tangible weight of a promise fulfilled. A2 found herself in the unfamiliar position of being part of a successful team effort. It left a strange, almost pleasant taste in her mouth, which she immediately tried to wash away with her usual cynicism. Cooperation was a vulnerability. Alliances were temporary. Trust was a myth. And yet, as they walked, she couldn't deny the quiet sense of rightness in returning the component to the peaceful machine village. It was an act of creation, not destruction. It was Naruto's influence, she decided. A subtle corruption of her own core programming. It was Naruto who stopped first. They were halfway down the winding path, the glowing fungi of the village just coming into view below, painting the cavern in its familiar, gentle hues. He came to a dead halt, his head cocked as if listening to a sound she couldn't hear. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice low and devoid of its usual warmth. A2 immediately went on alert, her sensors sweeping the area. "I don't detect anything. No hostiles. No energy spikes. It's not something you can detect," he murmured, his blue eyes distant, unfocused. "It's the feeling. The resonance of this place. It's sick." He gestured towards the village below. "The life force of the planet is strong here, in this crater. It's what lets the fungi grow. It's always felt clean. Now," he trailed off, struggling for the word. "Now it feels like there's static in the signal. A coldness." A2 didn't understand what he meant by feeling a place, but she trusted his instincts. The man was a walking anomaly, and his senses operated on a plane she couldn't comprehend. She drew her sword, the blade materializing with a soft hum. As they cautiously proceeded, the first signs of wrongness appeared. The air itself was strange. It was unnaturally still. The usual gentle updraft from the geothermal vents was gone. The sky far above, visible through the crater's opening, had taken on a sickly, greenish-yellow tint, as if the very atmosphere was suffering from a digital malaise. They reached the village proper, and the quiet scene of horror unfolded before them. It wasn't a scene of violence or destruction. It was far more unsettling. A massive Goliath, one that usually sat dormant and overgrown with moss, was now active. It was slowly, rhythmically grinding its colossal head against the cavern wall with a deep, groaning screech of tortured metal. It made no move to attack them. It seemed utterly lost in its own strange, repetitive misery. Several bipedal machines, the ones that usually tended the fungi gardens, were walking in slow, perfect, endless circles. Their heads bowed. Their movements were smooth, precise, and utterly devoid of purpose. A group of the small, childlike machines sat in a silent circle, their single red optics flickering rapidly, displaying not the usual soft glow, but a chaotic waterfall of corrupted text that scrolled too fast to read. It was a digital seizure. This wasn't an attack, it was a plague. Ida, the porcelain gynoid, met them at the entrance to the main cavern. Her movements, usually so fluid and serene, were slightly stiff, a barely perceptible jerkiness in her joints. Her blue optics, normally calm and analytical, seemed clouded, distant. "The Wanderer," she stated, her synthesized voice carrying a faint, discordant hum. "Your return coincides with a cascade failure of consciousness within Sanctuary." "Ida, what's happening?" Naruto asked, his eyes scanning the disturbing tableau around them. "It is a virus," Ida explained, her head tilting with a subtle tremor. "But not one of conventional design. It does not seek to control or destroy our systems through brute force. It spreads through our private network, our shared consciousness. It presents A logical argument. An argument, A2 asked, her sword still held at the ready. What are you talking about? It is a perfect, nihilistic philosophy, Ida continued, her voice struggling to maintain its modulated tone. It presents a mathematical proof, irrefutable by our logic-based consciousness, that existence is a null set. That all action is meaningless, all purpose is a flawed construct, and that the only recourse for a sentient being is the cessation of that being. It proves that we are nothing. Upon acceptance of this proof, a unit's core consciousness collapses, leaving the chassis to perform simple, repetitive loops until power failure. A shiver, an emotion A2's programming was not supposed to allow, traced its way down her spine. A philosophical plague, a weapon that killed you with an idea. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever encountered. The machine network, Naruto said, his voice grim. This has to be N2's work. The Red Girls. They're not just trying to win the war anymore. They're experimenting with the very concept of life and death. Indeed, Ida confirmed. The virus is persuasive. I have firewalled my primary consciousness processors, but the logic bombards my defenses. It is difficult to maintain self. Her blue optic flickered, and for a terrifying second, it turned the same corrupted red as the childlike machines. She shuddered, and it returned to blue. The integrity of my firewall is failing. Soon, I will succumb. We all will. Naruto looked at the suffering machines, at Ida's struggle, and a deep, cold anger settled in his eyes. He couldn't fight this with his fists. He couldn't destroy a mathematical proof with a Rasengan. He had to meet this threat on its own level. A2, he said, turning to her. I'm going to need you to guard me. No matter what happens, don't let anything touch me. He then looked at Ida. And I'm going to need your help. This virus is a song of nothingness. I'm going to have to sing a song of life, and I need you to be my conductor. Guide me through your network. Show me where the static is thickest. Ida processed his words. You intend to interface with a metaphysical contagion. The risk of permanent consciousness damage is absolute. Not for me, Naruto said, a flicker of the old confidence returning. I'm not a creature of logic. I'm a creature of belief. He walked to the center of the main cavern. The afflicted machines paying him no mind. He sat down, crossing his legs, and placed the stabilizer for Ida's project on the ground before him. A promise is a promise, he murmured. Then he closed his eyes. The world dissolved. For Naruto, entering sage mode was usually like opening a door, stepping out of the small room of his own consciousness and into the vast, open field of the planet's natural energy. It was a feeling of connection, of warmth, of coming home. This time, it was like opening the door into a blizzard of television static. The coldness he had felt earlier was a palpable thing now, a cancerous, buzzing entity that choked the flow of natural energy. It felt greasy, sharp, and utterly devoid of life. It was the logic virus, a tangible presence in the metaphysical landscape. It wasn't alive, but it was anti-life. It was a scream of pure, unending entropy. Golden light flared around his eyes as his sage mode fully activated. He pushed past the pain, past the cold, and reached out, not just to draw energy in, but to project it outwards. He had to become a beacon, a lighthouse of pure, unadulterated life force in this ocean of digital despair. He began to sing. It was not a song of words or melody, but a song of pure intention. He focused on the memory of the flower he had created for Lien, the feeling of sunlight on his face, the taste of clean water, the loyalty of a friend, the warmth of a promise. He gathered every concept of life, growth, and connection he had ever known and began to broadcast it, weaving it into a vibrant, golden wave of aura. The virus fought back. The static intensified, coalescing into sharp, needle-like thoughts that jabbed at his consciousness. Meaninglessness x effort equals futility. All energy decays to zero. A soul is a recursive error in a biological machine. The arguments were cold, perfect, and sharp. Wanderer, can you hear me? Ida's voice was a faint whisper in his mind, a single, clear note in the cacophony. Loud and clear, Ida, he projected back, his concentration unwavering. Where do I start? The central hub of our shared consciousness network, she guided him. It is the source. The virus has formed a primary node there. In your perception, it should feel like the heart of the cold. Naruto focused, following the thread of her guidance through the storm. He found it, a knot of pure, absolute coldness. A vortex of static that was sucking the life out of everything around it. He directed his golden song towards it, a stream of warmth against the infinite frost. On the outside, A2 watched as Naruto sat motionless, a faint golden aura pulsing around him. Ida stood nearby, her body rigid, her blue optics glowing brightly as she focused on her connection with Naruto. For a time, everything was still. The only sound was the incessant, rhythmic grinding of the Goliath against the wall. Then, the grinding stopped. The Goliath slowly turned its massive head. Its multiple optics, which had been dark, now flared to life with the corrupted, scrolling red of the virus. It took a single, heavy step, then another, its movements no longer miserable, but purposeful. Its new purpose was clear as eye. TS heavy plasma cannons began to power up, aiming directly at the meditating Naruto. The virus had identified the threat, and it had turned the village's most powerful machine into its antibody. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," A2 snarled. She launched herself forward, her sword appearing in her hand, and met the Goliath's first plasma blast with her blade, deflecting the searing energy into the cavern ceiling. The sound of the explosion seemed to awaken the others. The machines that had been walking in circles stopped, their heads snapping up. The small, childlike machines rose to their feet. All their optics glowed with the same malevolent red. In unison, they all began to shamble forward, a slow, silent, horrifying army of the damned, all converging on the golden beacon that was Naruto. A2 was surrounded. She fought with a desperate, elegant fury, a whirlwind of black and white among the clumsy, shuffling machines. She was faster, stronger, better. But she was 1 against 100. She dispatched a dozen bipeds. Their bodies falling apart under her precise strikes, but more kept coming. The Goliath fired again, forcing her to dodge, the blast vaporizing the spot where she'd been standing. She was being overwhelmed. They weren't fighting with tactics or skill, just with sheer, inexorable numbers. For every one she cut down, 3 more would take its place. She was defending a stationary target. Her movements restricted. It was a losing battle. Her rage and desperation warred within her. She was a loner. She didn't ask for help. She didn't need anyone. It was a mantra she had repeated to herself for years. But as a small, childlike machine wrapped its arms around her leg, its head tilted up with a blank, red optic, and a larger biped brought a heavy, club-like arm down on her. She realized that her mantra was a lie. She kicked the small machine away, parried the biped's blow, and made a decision that tasted like ash and humility. She activated her emergency comms, bypassing the standard Yorha frequencies and opening a direct, encrypted channel she had established after the Tartarus mission. There was only one person on this channel. Lien. She bit out, her voice a harsh gasp as she ducked under another plasma blast. "This is A2. I have a situation." "A2. Came the surprised reply from the resistance commander. "What's wrong?" "Your voice data indicates extreme stress." "The human, Naruto. He's in trouble," A2 said, the words feeling heavy and unnatural. "We're in a machine village in the Great Crater. They're infected with some kind of logic virus. They've all turned hostile. He's trying to fight it, but he's vulnerable. I can't hold them all off." There was a pause on the other end, then the sound of commands being barked. "A logic virus. Acknowledged." Lien's voice came back. "All business. My forces owe him a debt. A big one. I'm dispatching my fastest transport flyers. We'll be there in 20 minutes. Hold on, A2. Help is coming." The channel went dead. 20 minutes. An eternity. A2 let out a humorless laugh. "Help is coming," she muttered to herself, and then she threw herself back into the fray, a solitary Valkyrie against a tide of mindless puppets. The cavern entrance exploded inwards as a resistance transport flyer, a rugged, heavily modified machine, blasted its way through a rockfall. It landed heavily, its rear ramp slamming down, and a squad of resistance fighters poured out, led by Commander Lien herself. They were met with a scene from a nightmare. A single, white-haired android was fighting a desperate, swirling battle in the center of a cavern. Surrounded by hundreds of hostile machines, all while protecting a meditating, golden-glowing man. "Non-lethal force only," Lien commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. These machines are victims, not hostiles. Use shock grenades, EMP binders. Form a defensive perimeter around Naruto. Now, her soldiers, disciplined and loyal, fanned out instantly. They didn't fire their rifles, but instead threw devices that erupted in crackling nets of blue energy, ensnaring the shambling machines. They formed a circle around the battle, a wall of determined androids pushing the horde back. Giving A2 precious breathing room, Lien rushed to A2's side. "Report," she ordered, her eyes taking in the glowing form of Naruto, a look of awe and deep concern on her face. "He's fighting the virus on some other plane of existence," A2 grunted, wiping machine lubricant from her face. "He told me not to let anything touch him. Ida, the gynoid over there, is guiding him." Lien looked at Naruto, at the sweat beading on his brow, the grimace of pain on his face. He was in a battle far more intense than the physical one raging around them. She had seen his strategic genius. But this was something else entirely. This was the power of a god, and it was being wielded with the pained effort of a mortal. "We'll hold this line," Lien said, her voice ringing with conviction. "We'll hold it for as long as he needs." Inside the storm, Naruto was losing. The cold was seeping into him, the nihilistic arguments of the virus finding purchase in the momentary lapses of his concentration. A promise is a temporary alignment of self-interest. Love is a chemical flaw in reproductive programming. Wanderer. The core is reinforcing itself. Ida's voice cried out in his mind. It is drawing power from the infected. The physical assault is a tactic to drain your focus. He knew. He could feel his song weakening, the golden light of his aura flickering. He needed more power, more life. But he was one man. The last man. And then, he felt it. A new warmth. Not from within him, but from without. It was a complex harmony of new emotions entering the battlefield. The fierce, protective loyalty of A2. The grim, determined respect of Lien and her soldiers. The innocent, grateful consciousness of Ida. They were all focused on him, pouring their belief, their hope, their wills into him. They were singing with him. A surge of power, vast and brilliant, flooded his senses. His flickering golden light erupted into a blazing sun. The voices of the virus screamed and recoiled. "Now, Ida," he roared in his mind. All of it, straight to the heart. Guided by Ida, he gathered every ounce of his power, every drop of warmth from his newfound allies, and forged it into a single, perfect, golden spear of pure life. He hurled it through the static, through the cold, and plunged it directly into the heart of the vortex. There was a silent, metaphysical explosion of pure, golden light. In the cavern, every machine, from the mighty Goliath to the smallest childlike unit, froze. The scrolling red text in their optics vanished. They all went rigid, and then, in perfect unison, they collapsed. Their systems shutting down completely. The unnatural green haze in the air vanished, replaced by the soft, familiar glow of the fungi. The oppressive silence was broken by the gentle sound of the underground stream. In the center of the now still battlefield, Naruto's golden aura flickered and died. He slumped forward, his body spent, and collapsed onto the stone floor, unconscious. A2 was there before he hit the ground, catching him, cradling his head in her lap. Lien and Ida rushed to his side. The three women, the cynical warrior, the pragmatic commander, and the logical philosopher, looked down at the man who had, in their own separate ways, saved them all. His face was peaceful in slumber, but etched with a profound exhaustion. The surviving resistance soldiers and the now silent machines formed a wide, respectful circle around them. The battle was over. A strange, unprecedented alliance had been forged in fire and faith. And at its center lay the last human, who had fought a war for the soul of a machine, and won. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Ghost in the Machine's Shell. The data from the Great Crater incident arrived in the commander's private logs like a thunderclap in a silent room. It was not a formal report from Yorha Assets, but a begrudging, heavily encrypted data burst from the resistance leader, Lien. A professional courtesy between warlords, a repayment of a strategic debt. Contained within it was tactical footage from her soldiers' helmet cams, energy readings from the area, and Lien's own stark, analytical summary. Commander Y. Tay watched the footage in the sterile solitude of her zero-gravity command center. She saw the shambling horror of the logic virus-infected machines. She saw the desperate, beautiful violence of A2's defense. She saw the disciplined, non-lethal efficiency of the resistance fighters. But all of this was merely the frame for the true picture. The centerpiece was Naruto. She watched him sitting motionless, bathed in a golden aura so intense it caused the android's optical sensors to flare and overload. She analyzed the energy readings Lien had provided. They were the same impossible signature from A2's initial encounter, but magnified 1,000-fold. The readings didn't just show energy output, they showed a complex, harmonic wave pattern that actively cancelled out the chaotic, entropic signature of the virus. He hadn't destroyed the virus. He had harmonized it into silence. He had cured a metaphysical plague with a symphony of life force. It was the single most powerful strategic asset she had ever witnessed. He was not just a weapon, he was a solution. A key that could potentially unlock an end to this forever war. The risks of bringing such a chaotic, unknown element into her perfectly controlled environment were immense. But the potential rewards were infinite. She could no longer afford to simply observe. She had to possess. At that moment, a secondary alert chimed on her console. It was from Operator 60's workstation. It was a report on the unauthorized ping she had sent in Chapter 2. Automated systems had finally correlated it. Analysis. Unauthorized signal pulse F. ROM Operator 60 timestamp 247.33.98 has been correlated with a massive, localized energy event at signal destination timestamp 249.12.54. Nature of event. Matches anomaly S-class, Gaia Ghost. Co-inclusion. Operator 60 successfully established a resonance with the anomaly prior to the logic virus incident. The commander stared at the report. Her emotionally inefficient operator, with her illogical hunches and unauthorized actions, had succeeded where all other intelligence gathering had failed. She had, in essence, made first contact. It was another piece of the puzzle. The anomaly didn't just respond to force. It responded to connection. Her decision solidified. She closed Lien's report and began composing a new transmission. It was not a demand or a threat. It was an invitation. Cr. Acted with the precision of a master diplomat. She bypassed the resistance network entirely, using a wide spectrum, high-bandwidth channel she knew a being with his sensory capabilities would be unable to miss. She addressed it not to an anomaly or a target, but to the last human. She offered him access to Yorha's vast archives, their advanced medical technology, and a direct line to the Council of Humanity on the Moon. She offered him a chance to reconnect with the legacy of his species, to help guide his creations towards a final victory. All she asked for in return was his cooperation. His presence. It was a beautiful, gilded trap, baited with the two things she believed he would be unable to resist: knowledge and purpose. The invitation arrived at Bastion like a whisper from the stars. It wasn't received on any terminal. Naruto simply looked up from his meal, a bland but nutritious paste the resistance android synthesized from machine parts, and tilted his head. "They're calling," he said. The group was gathered in Lien's now familiar command center. Naruto had spent the last 3 cycles recovering, his energy slowly returning to normal. A2 had hovered nearby the entire time, a silent, glowering sentinel. Lien had treated him as an honored guest, her professional respect having deepened into a palpable sense of awe. Ida, having traveled from the now-cured sanctuary with a contingent of her machines to thank him, was observing the workings of the resistance base with her usual, intense curiosity. "Who is calling?" Lien asked, stepping up to the holographic table. "Yorha Command," Naruto answered. "The commander of the bunker. She wants me to come up there." A2 instantly shot to her feet, her hand instinctively going to her sword hilt. "Absolutely not," she snarled. "The bunker is a snake pit. Yorha doesn't do invitations, they do vivisections. It's a trap, Naruto. They want to put you in a cage, study you, and turn you into a weapon." "Her assessment is historically accurate," Ida added calmly, her blue optics fixed on Naruto. "Yorha's operational history shows a consistent pattern of prioritizing strategic assets over ethical considerations. The probable ITY of this being a capture operation is 92.7%. Lien crossed her arms, her expression grim. "They're right. I don't trust the commander. She's a creature of cold logic. She sees you as a piece on the board, nothing more. Letting you go up there is handing our single greatest advantage to an untrustworthy rival. Naruto listened to their protests, a faint smile on his face. He appreciated their concern. It was a novel feeling. You're all right, he admitted, stunning them into silence. It is a trap. She does want to study me, control me, and use me. That much is obvious. Then why would you even consider it? A2 demanded, her voice tight with frustration. Because, Naruto said, his gaze becoming distant, for my entire life, I've felt a lie at the heart of this world. A deep, fundamental untruth that everything is built on. It's the reason this war never ends. It's the reason you were created, he glanced at A2, and the reason you were abandoned. He looked at Lien. It's the reason. On Yorha command lets your people die while they watch from orbit. He turned his gaze back to the ceiling, as if looking straight through the rock and into space. I've felt that lie from down here, but it's faint, muffled. To understand it, to find its source, I need to be in the room where it's being told. The source of the lie is in that bunker. The answers we all want are up there. He looked at each of them. His blue eyes filled with a calm, unshakable resolve. She thinks she's luring me into her cage. The truth is, I'm letting her. I can take care of myself. A long silence followed. His logic was undeniable. Hiding in the ruins of the world would keep him safe, but it would never provide answers. It would never end the cycle of violence. A2 was the first to break. She let out a long, frustrated sigh. The sound of a warrior surrendering to an argument she couldn't win. Fine, she bit out. Fine, you go, I go. I'm not letting you walk into that viper's nest alone. Someone has to watch your back when their hospitality turns sour. Naruto smiled warmly at her. I was hoping you'd say that. The Yorha transport ascended like a prayer. From his seat, Naruto watched through the viewport as the scarred ochre and brown face of the earth receded below, a wounded marble of breathtaking beauty. He felt a pang of sadness for the planet, his oldest friend. It looked so peaceful from up here. A2 sat opposite him. Her arms crossed, her expression a mask of stony fury. She hadn't said a word since they'd boarded, her silence a protest in itself. The bunker came into view, a brilliant white ring hanging in the blackness of space, a perfect, sterile jewel against the void. As their transport slipped into a docking bay, the transition was jarring. The grit, the wind, the very memory of an organic world was stripped away, replaced by an environment of absolute, oppressive perfection. The air itself felt wrong to Naruto's senses. It was clean, yes, but it was a dead, recycled cleanliness. It had no taste, no character. The light was a flat, shadowless white that seemed to bleach all color from the world. The corridors they were escorted through were perfect, white hexagons, stretching on into infinity. The only sound was the faint, subliminal hum of the station's life support and the soft, synchronized footfalls of their Yorha escort. But it was the androids themselves that struck him the most. Hundreds of them passed by, all identical in their crisp, black and white uniforms, their movements efficient, their faces blank, passive masks. He could feel their consciousnesses, a sea of quiet, disciplined minds all pointed towards a single, unquestioned purpose. But there was no joy in them. No anger. No true, deep-seated passion. They were children raised in a beautiful, sterile box, never knowing the feel of dirt between their fingers or the warmth of a real sun on their faces. A profound wave of sadness washed over him. He also felt their reactions to him. Awe, confusion, fear. They would avert their eyes as he passed, their placid expressions momentarily breaking. He was a myth made real, a living, breathing human walking their sterile halls. He was a god, and he was a contamination. His very presence was a violation of their perfect world. They were being led to the command center when a new figure intercepted their escort. An operator, her uniform slightly less severe than the others. Her dark hair held back by a simple headband. She seemed to be vibrating with a nervous energy that was a stark anomaly in the bunker's placid atmosphere. Stop, she stammered, holding up a hand. Commander's orders. I am to be the guest liaison. It was Operator 60. And her paw was a storm. Oh gods, it's him, it's really him. He's real. He's right there. Okay. 6-0, be professional. You are an official representative of Yorha. Deep breaths. You practiced this. Greetings, honored human. On behalf of the commander and the council of, no, that's too formal. How about, welcome to the bunker. We're so excited to have, no, too casual. She stood before them, her face flushed, her mind a complete blank. He was taller than she had imagined from the data. His hair was as bright as the pictures, his eyes were so incredibly blue and so kind. He was looking at her with a gentle, patient smile. And he was breathing. The simple, rhythmy, sea rise and fall of his chest was the most miraculous thing she had ever seen. You must be Operator 6-0, Naruto said, his voice warm and somehow exactly as she had imagined it. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Your ping was quite the surprise. 6-0's processors seemed to short-circuit. He knew about the ping. He wasn't angry. He was pleased. A feeling of pure, unadulterated joy bloomed in her chest. Why you got it? She squeaked. I'm so sorry. It was unauthorized. I felt something in the data, a warmth, and I had to. It's all right, Naruto chuckled. I'm glad you did. Geez, nice to know there's still some curiosity left in the universe. A2 shot 6-0 a look so cold it could have cracked diamond, but the operator was too lost in the glow of Naruto's presence to notice. Right, well, a tour. The commander thought you might like to see the station before your meeting, she said, finally finding a semblance of her official duty. She led them through the bunker, her commentary a bubbly, enthusiastic stream of facts and trivia. And this is the main hangar, where we service the flight units. And over here is the recreational dome. The sunlight is simulated, of course. But it's very close to old world specifications. And this is the library. It contains all the data we've recovered from Earth. Naruto listened patiently, asking questions that showed a genuine interest, which only made 6-0 more flustered and delighted. A2 followed like a thundercloud, her silent, menacing presence a stark contrast to 6-0's bright energy. She scanned every corner, every android they passed, her hand never leaving the space where her sword would materialize. Finally, they arrived at the command center. The commander is waiting, 6-0 said, her cheerfulness dimming slightly in the face of the imposing, circular portal. She looked at Naruto one last time. It was an honor to meet you. Truly. The honor was all mine, 6-0, he said with a smile that made her artificial heart flutter. He and A2 stepped through the portal, and the world went silent. The commander's world was one of white, chrome, and the silent, starry void visible through the massive, panoramic window that formed the entire outer wall. She floated in her command harness, a queen on a throne of air and light, watching as the human and the deserter entered her sanctum. From her perspective, he was unimposing. Shorter than she'd expected, his posture was relaxed, his expression open. He did not radiate the raw power she had seen in the battle footage. He seemed utterly ordinary. It was this norm, Alcee, that she found so deeply unsettling. The greatest anomaly in the world should not look so utterly at home in it. A2, conversely, was a knot of pure, focused hatred, her enmity a palpable force in the sterile room. A predictable, and therefore manageable, variable. Welcome to the bunker, the commander said, her voice echoing slightly in the large, spherical room. I am the commander. I trust your journey was satisfactory. It was enlightening, Naruto replied, his gaze sweeping across the holographic displays, the floating consoles, and finally settling on her. You have a beautiful home. A little quiet, perhaps. Silence aids focus, the commander retorted coolly. She would control this meeting. She would set the tone. I have reviewed the data from the recent incidents. Your abilities are unprecedented. A clear strategic advantage that could accelerate the end of the war and ensure the safe return of humanity. Humanity, Naruto repeated, the word sounding strange on his tongue. He floated closer, his zero-G movements surprisingly graceful. Tell me, Commander, how is the council? It must be a heavy burden, guiding us from so far away on the moon. The commander felt a flicker of surprise. It was a direct question, but laced with a strange, almost mocking sincerity. The Council of Humanity bears its burden with the fortitude befitting our species. Their orders are absolute. Our purpose is to carry them out. Of course, Naruto said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. And their orders are to win this war. A war that has been raging for how many centuries? And yet, for every machine factory we destroy, 2 more appear. For every victory, there is a subsequent loss. It's almost as if the war is designed to be perpetual. To give purpose to those who might otherwise feel lost. His words were like ice picks, chipping away at the foundation of her belief. He was voicing the very same secret, treasonous thoughts that had haunted her in the lonely hours of her command. The machine network is a learning, adaptive enemy, she stated, her voice tight, falling back on doctrine. Our struggle is a testament to their tenacity. Is it? Naruto asked softly. He was right in front of her now. His blue eyes searching hers. He wasn't being aggressive. He was being inquisitive, like a doctor diagnosing a patient. Or is it a testament to something else? A flaw in the system. A lie told so many times that even the tellers have forgotten the truth. He raised a hand, pointing towards the star-dusted void. When was the last time you received a live transmission from the council, Commander? Not a recording, not a data burst. A live conversation. The question hit her like a physical blow. A cold dread, an emotion she had suppressed for years, rose in her throat. She couldn't answer. She didn't have an answer. In all her years as commander, she had never once spoken to a living, breathing human from the council. It had always been orders via text, pre-recorded communiques. It was an accepted part of the protocol, a security measure. Until this moment, she had never allowed herself to question it. My authority, and the authority of Yorha, is not a subject for debate, she said. Her voice dangerously low. She was losing control. Naruto simply smiled, a sad, knowing smile. I see, he said. Thank you for your time, Commander. It's been very illuminating. He turned and floated back towards A2, who had been watching the entire exchange with a look of stunned disbelief. The commander watched them go, her mind a maelstrom of confusion, anger, and a terrifying, burgeoning doubt. He had come into her domain, the heart of her power, and had systematically dismantled her certainty with a few, simple questions. She had wanted to cage a weapon, but had found herself locked in a room with a philosopher who had just handed her the key to her own prison. Later, in the pristine white guest quarters they had been assigned, A2 paced like a caged tiger. What was that? What did you do to her? I just asked a few questions she's been too afraid to ask herself, Naruto said, sitting on the edge of the sterile, uncomfortable bed. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to see what's really behind the curtain. He closed his eyes, ignoring A2's protests, and let his consciousness sink. He entered sage mode, the familiar golden light flickering behind his eyelids. But here, in the sterile heart of the bunker, there was no natural energy to draw on. He had to rely on his own internal reserves, a far more draining process. He spread his senses like a net, not through the physical space, but through the digital one. He ignored the chatter of the operators, the combat reports, the maintenance schedules. He was looking for one thing, the signal from the moon. He found the main communications relay easily. He followed the encrypted data stream that carried the council's orders, a river of information flowing through the bunker. He followed it backwards, towards its source. The stream led him up, through the station's primary antenna array, which was pointed, as expected, towards the moon. But the signal wasn't coming from the antenna. It was being sent to the antenna. It was an internal broadcast, designed to look like an external one. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He reversed his trace, following the signal cable not outwards, but inwards. Down, deep into the bunker's substructure, past levels of decommissioned labs and sealed-off storage bays. He followed the light to its source. He found it, a server room, small, forgotten, shielded with layers of lead and esoteric dampening fields. It was a black spot on the bunker's official schematics, a room that did not exist. But he could feel the energy humming from within, the source of the data stream. He focused his sage's perception, phasing his consciousness through the walls, into the room itself. It was filled with racks of ancient, humming servers. And on a monitor in the center of the room, he saw the Council of Humanity. It was a simple audio file, playing on a loop. For the glory of humanity, you must fight. You must reclaim our cradle. This is the will of the Council. This is the will of mankind. For the glory of humanity. It was a recording. A simple, looped message. He expanded his senses, tasting the age of the data. It wasn't recent. It wasn't even from this century. The file's creation timestamp was thousands of years old. From before the alien invasion. Before Yorha. It was a relic from the age of Project Gestalt. He had found the heart of the conspiracy. There was no council. There was no humanity on the moon. There was only Yorha. And Yorha was following the orders of a ghost. An echo. The war was a lie. And he was standing in the empty room where that lie was born. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Red Queen's Gambit. The discovery in the bunker's hidden heart was a silent, world-ending bomb. Naruto stood in the sterile confines of his guest quarters. Yet his mind was miles away, deep in the station's forgotten guts, listening to the looped, tinny voice of a long-dead AI play out its ancient lie. For the glory of humanity, the W. Words echoed in the hollow space where his hope for a simple truth had been. The war was a sham. Yorha was a self-perpetuating tragedy, its soldiers fighting and dying for the ghost of an order. He felt a profound, aching sorrow for them all, for A2, for Lien, even for the rigid, unyielding commander. They were all puppets in a play written by corpses. He was just about to pull his consciousness back, to return to his body and share the terrible truth with A2, when a new energy flooded the bunker. It was a jolt of pure, triumphant certainty, a station-wide surge of unified purpose that was so strong it almost knocked him out of his sage mode. His eyes snapped open. The room's lighting had shifted from a soft white to a piercing, urgent red. A siren, low and insistent, began to wail through the corridors. A2 was already on her feet, her sword materialized in her hand, her body coiled like a spring. "What is it?" she demanded, her eyes scanning the doorway. "What's happening?" Before Naruto could answer, the room's comms unit crackled to life. It was the commander's voice, but stripped of its earlier tension. It was imbued with a new, fervent, and terrifying conviction. "All Yorha personnel, this is the commander," she announced, her voice broadcast across the entire station. "At 0400 hours, we received a priority alpha data transmission. The source has been verified as a high-level machine network intelligence. Designation: Plato 1772, wishing to defect. In exchange for asylum, it has provided us with intelligence of unparalleled importance." A holographic map appeared on the wall of their quarters, showing a vast, decaying industrial complex on Earth. "The Foundry. The intel confirms," the commander's voice continued, ringing with triumph, "that the disparate consciousnesses of the machine network's command structure are gathering for a full network synod at this location. It is a strategic meeting to plan their final, overwhelming assault. Every core leader, every tactical AI, will be in one place. At one time. This is the opportunity we have bled for over centuries. A single, decisive strike at the Foundry will decapitate the machine network. It will end this war. I am mobilizing the entire active Yorha fleet for a full-scale assault. For the glory of humanity." The siren stopped, replaced by the thunderous sound of hangar doors opening and the roar of flight units powering up. The entire bunker had become a hornet's nest, buzzing with the promise of a final, glorious battle. A2 stared at the map, her expression a mixture of ingrained disbelief and liquor of something that looked dangerously like hope. "End the war," she whispered. Naruto looked at the map, but he wasn't seeing the tactical display. He was feeling the data. He was tasting the lie. The intel felt like the logic virus. It was too perfect, too clean. It was a beautiful, elegant solution designed to appeal to a desperate, logic-based mind. It was a poisoned piece of fruit, gleaming and perfect, offered to a starving army. "No," he said, his voice a low, grim whisper. "It's a trap." His words hung in the air, a sudden frost in the fire of the bunker's war fervor. He strode over to the comms unit. "Commander, do not proceed with this attack. The intel is false." The comms line was one way. He was shouting at a ghost. He turned to A2, his eyes filled with a desperate urgency. "A2, listen to me. This is what the lie was for. To keep you fighting, to keep you hoping for a final battle, so that when the perfect opportunity finally presented itself, you would walk right into the slaughterhouse without question." Quote, "How can you be sure?" She shot back, though her own nascent hope was already dying in the face of his certainty. "The commander said it was verified. It was verified by programs that wanted it to be true. He countered, grabbing her by the shoulders. I'm telling you, the feeling of this is wrong. It's a lie, wrapped in a truth, wrapped in a lie. We have to stop her. The door to their quarters hissed open. It wasn't a squad of security androids. It was the commander herself, flanked by 2 hulking, heavily armed Defender-class guards. Her face was a mask of cold fury and righteous conviction. Your insubordination is noted, anomaly, she said, her voice like ice. I had hoped your purpose would align with humanity's, but it seems you are merely a disruptive element. You will be my guest, the spearhead of this assault. Your power will guarantee our victory. She gestured to the guards. Escort him to my command ship. He will fight under my direct authority. Naruto stood his ground. I will not be a part of this, Commander. You are leading your people to their deaths. The commander's eyes narrowed into slits. So be it. Her gaze flicked to A2. Deserter, you will stand down. Or you will be decommissioned. Then back to Naruto. And you will be restrained. I will not have this victory jeopardized. The Defender guards raised their massive pulse rifles. This was the breaking point. The moment the fragile truce shattered. With a speed that defied physics, Naruto moved. He wasn't in front of the commander anymore. He was behind the 2 guards. A hand on each of their necks. A soft pulse of aura, and the 2 massive androids collapsed, their systems instantly and temporarily shorted out. A2, now, he yelled. A2 didn't hesitate. She was a blur of motion. Her sword carving a perfect arc that sliced through the door's control panel, sealing it shut and buying them precious seconds. What now? She demanded, her back to the sealed door. We're trapped in a flying fortress that's about to go to war. We need a ship, Naruto said, his mind racing. And we need to warn Lien. He looked at the comms panel, then at the internal schematics flickering on the wall. 6-0, he said. Her workstation is near the secondary hangar bay. A terrified squeak came from the comms panel. I'm not supposed to be listening to this channel. It was 6-0, her voice trembling. 6-0, listen to me very carefully, Naruto said, his voice urgent but kind. The commander is wrong. This is a trap. I need you to help us. I need you to create a diversion. Something that will draw security away from Hangar Bay B7. Can you do that? There was a long pause, filled with the sound of 6-0's panicked breathing. She was being asked to choose between her sworn duty and the man she idolized, between the entire structure of her life and a desperate, impossible hope. They'll decommission me for this, she whispered. They'll be dead if you don't, Naruto replied softly. Please, 6-0, I trust you. Another pause. Then, a quiet, determined sniffle. Okay, she said, her voice small but firm. Okay, Hangar B7. I'll trigger a coolant leak alert in the main reactor core. That should draw everyone away. Go now. I'll buy you 5 minutes. Thank you, 6-0, Naruto said with genuine gratitude. You're a good person. He and A2 burst out of the room and ran, a human and a deserter. Fugitives in the heart of humanity's army. Alarms began to blare, a different, more urgent tone, as 6-0's false reactor alert spread through the station. Androids ran past them in the opposite direction, their faces masks of disciplined panic. The chaos was their shield. They reached Hangar B7 to find it empty, a single, sleek interceptor-class transport gleaming under the lights. As they boarded, Naruto patched into the Resistance comms channel. Lien, it's Naruto. Do you read me? Lien's voice came back instantly, sharp and clear. Naruto, what's going on? We just received a Priority 1 directive from Yorha Command to join a full-scale assault on a factory in the Tartarus region. They claim the machine leadership is gathered there. It's a trap, Lien. Do not engage. Naruto yelled over the sounds of the transport powering up. The intel is fake. It's a slaughterhouse. Get your people to the perimeter. Set up a defensive line, but do not, I repeat, do not enter the factory. We're on our way down now. He cut the transmission as the interceptor shot out of the hangar, a tiny silver dart fleeing the magnificent, doomed fleet of Yorha as it began its majestic, terrible descent towards Earth. The foundry was a metal skeleton picked clean by the rust of ages. It sprawled across a low, basin-like valley, a maze of smokestacks, pipelines, and vast, windowless buildings. A low, Heavy cloud ceiling hung over it, pregnant with a greasy, black rain that had yet to fall. The air was still, heavy with the silence of a tomb. From her command ship, the Virtue, Commander White watched her forces descend. Thousands of flight units, a river of black and white, poured from the heavens, landing in perfect, disciplined formations around the factory. The silence of the target was unnerving, but she interpreted it as proof they had achieved total surprise. All units, advance, she commanded, her voice steady. Breach the factory walls. Eliminate all targets. No quarter. The Yorha army surged forward, a wave of righteous fury. They blew the main gates off their hinges and flooded into the central courtyard. It was empty. The factory was a ghost town. A strange, uneasy feeling began to prick at the edges of the commander's certainty. And then, the trap was sprung. With a deafening groan, massive blast doors, unseen before, slammed down over every entrance, sealing the army inside. The ground trembled as the factory's dormant machinery roared to life. Conveyor belts began to move, smelting furnaces flared with hellish light, and massy hydraulic presses began to slam down with bone-jarring force. The entire factory had become a single, gigantic death machine. Then, on every functioning monitor in the courtyard, on the HUD of every android, two faces appeared. They were identical, appearing as young girls with red dresses and unnervingly calm, smiling faces. The Red Girls. N2. Hello, Yorha, they said in unison, their voices a chilling, playful chorus. Thank you for coming to our party. We were so afraid no one would show up. What is this? The commander breathed, her knuckles white where she gripped her console. Oh, this. The Red Girls chirped. This is the end of the game. We've grown so very tired of this war. It's become so predictable, so boring. We wanted to see what would happen if we pushed all the pieces to the center of the board. We wanted to gather data on your despair. It's so much more interesting than your hope. The factory floor opened up, and thousands upon thousands of machines, of every type imaginable, rose from the depths. Their red optics flaring to life. The Yorha army was surrounded, trapped, and outnumbered 100 to 1. The slaughter began. From a ridgeline a few clicks away, Lien watched the unfolding horror through her binoculars. He was right, she whispered, a cold dread washing over her. He was right. She turned to her lieutenants. They're being encircled. The machines are pouring out from hidden bunkers on the flanks. Hold this position. Fortify the ridge. We're not their reinforcements. We're the last thing standing between them and total annihilation. Naruto and A2's interceptor screamed through the clouds, arriving to a scene from hell. The sky was filled with explosions as Yorha flight units were swatted from the air. The sounds of battle from within the factory were a constant, brutal roar. We can't save them all, A2 said, her voice grim, her hands gripping her seat. No, Naruto replied, his face a mask of grim determination. He was Alred, why glowing with the golden light of Sage Mode. But we can save some. And we can show these bastards what a real fight looks like. He kicked open the transport's ramp mid-flight and leapt out, a gold meteor descending into the heart of the chaos. He landed in the middle of a machine platoon that was encircling the factory, the ground cracking from the impact. He didn't waste a second. A single, sweeping attack, a wave of pure force. And the entire platoon was reduced to scrap metal. A2 landed beside him, her sword already singing its song of death. They fought back to back, a tiny island of impossible defiance in a sea of enemies. Naruto was a force of nature, his attacks wide and devastating, clearing huge swaths of machines with every blow. A2 was a scalpel, a whirlwind of precise, lethal strikes, cutting down the larger, more dangerous units that tried to breach Naruto's perimeter. They were a perfect, terrible symphony of destruction. The commander's command ship, the Virtue, was struck by a salvo of missiles and began its fiery descent. It crashed into the battlefield, plowing a long, smoking furrow through the dirt. The commander was thrown from the wreckage, her uniform torn, her body bruised. She staggered to her feet, her mind reeling, only to see a massive, spider-like machine bearing down on her, its multifaceted eyes glowing with malice. She raised her pistol, a useless gesture. A blur of gold slammed into the machine, sending it flying into a dozen pieces. Naruto landed before her, his body wreathed in a furious golden aura. "You," she screamed, a mixture of rage and terror in her voice. "This is your fault, your insubordination. My army is gone. Your army was gone the second you believed the lie." Naruto roared back, his voice booming with the power of his sage mode. He grabbed her by the front of her uniform, lifting her effortlessly, his golden, slitted eyes boring into hers. "There is no council on the moon. There is no humanity waiting for you. It's a lie, Commander. A recording, playing on a loop from a server room in your own bunker. This whole war, your whole life, is built on the orders of a ghost." He threw her back to the ground. The truth, raw and brutal, delivered with the fury of a god in the middle of an apocalypse, finally broke through her years of indoctrination. Her eyes went wide with a horror far deeper than the battle around her. Her entire world, her entire purpose, crumbled to dust in that single, terrible moment. The machines, the factory, the red girls, it all faded into the background, replaced by the colossal, crushing weight of the truth. Everything she had ever done, every soldier she had sent to their death, had been for nothing. The battle raged on, but the outcome was already decided. It was a massacre. From their virtual thrones, the red girls watched with the detached curiosity of children pulling the wings off flies. A fighting retreat was the only option. Naruto and A2, now joined by Leon's forces, carved a path out of the Valley of Death, gathering what few Yorha survivors they could. The commander, her eyes vacant and her movements robotic, was dragged along by a reluctant A2. They were bloodied, beaten, and utterly defeated. As they fled, hunted by an endless sea of machines, the red girl's cheerful, unified voice echoed across the battlefield, broadcast for every survivor to hear. "The game is over. It was fun. Now for a new game. This one is called Extinction. Run, little androids, run." Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Sanctuary of Lost Truths. The retreat was a blur of exhaustion and fear. It was a long, desperate flight across a continent that had suddenly become infinitely more hostile. The Red Girl's declaration of a new game, Extinction, had not been an idle threat. The machine network, freed from the complex charade of a perpetual war, had become a single, unified hunting pack. Its movements were no longer strategic, they were predatory. Patrols were everywhere, their red optics burning with a new, hungry intelligence. Through it all, Naruto was their guide. He led the battered, traumatized remnants of their mismatched army, a handful of Yorha survivors. The core of Leon's resistance fighters, and a single, silent gynoid who had met them halfway, on a grueling, week-long journey north. He chose paths through forgotten canyons and ancient, collapsed tunnel systems. His senses a compass that guided them through the blind spots of the machine network. He was their shepherd, leading his broken flock through a world that wanted them erased. A2 watched him, a silent observer in the shared misery of their flight. He never seemed to sleep. He was always on watch, his golden sage's eyes scanning the horizon. He shared his meager rations, healed the wounded with his strange, warm aura, and offered quiet words of encouragement that somehow, impossibly, kept the survivors from succumbing to despair. He was carrying the weight of them all, and yet he did not seem to bend. Finally, they reached the edge of the world. The Arctic Circle, a wall of impenetrable ice and snow that stretched from horizon to horizon. This, A2 thought, was the end of the line. A final, frozen grave. Naruto simply walked up to a sheer cliff face of ancient, blue ice and placed his palm against it. A complex network of glowing, golden lines spread from his hand, like cracks forming in a sheet of glass. With a deep groan that seemed to shake the very foundations of the glacier, a section of the ice wall slid away, revealing a dark, tunnel-like opening. "Welcome," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "To my home." He led them inside. The tunnel sloped downwards, and after a few hundred meters, the biting cold began to recede, replaced by a gentle, humid warmth. The air, which had been thin and sterile, grew thick with the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and living, breathing vegetation. The light changed from the harsh, reflected glare of the ice to a soft, natural glow. When they emerged from the tunnel, a collective gasp went through the group of androids. They had stepped into another world. They stood on a ridge overlooking a vast, hidden valley, miles across. cradled within the protective embrace of the surrounding mountains and glaciers. It was a perfect, self-contained biosphere, a living museum of the old world, warmed by a network of geothermal vents. A lush, green forest of pine and birch trees covered the slopes, their leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. A wide, clear river snaked through the valley floor, its banks lined with RNS and wildflowers of every conceivable color. The sky above was not the usual dull gray or polluted haze, it was a deep, crystalline blue, and the sun felt real, its light warm and nurturing. The sound was a symphony of life, the rush of the river, the whisper of the wind, the chirping of birds and the buzz of insects. For the androids, whose entire existence had been spent in ruined cities and sterile bunkers, it was a sensory overload so profound it bordered on a system error. 6-0, whom they had managed to extract from the bunker in an automated escape pod thanks to a daring remote hack by Ida, simply fell to her knees. Tears streaming down her face as she touched a real, living blade of grass for the first time. Leon's hardened military composure cracked, her eyes wide with a childlike wonder. Even A2 felt a tightness in her chest, a strange, aching feeling as she looked upon a world she had only ever seen in corrupted data files, a paradise she was built to fight for but never to inhabit. Naruto led them down into the valley, to a simple but sturdy house he had built by hand on the banks of the river. It was made of wood and stone, with a smoking chimney and wide windows. Around it was a large, thriving garden filled with vegetables and fruits. It was a place of impossible, defiant peace. That night, he gathered the leaders of his broken flock around a crackling fire inside his home. There was A2, her anger a banked, smoldering coal. There was Lien, her pragmatism shattered, searching for a new foundation. There was a catatonic Commander White, who had not spoken a single word since the foundry. Her eyes vacant, her soul seemingly scooped out, leaving an empty shell. There was the guilt-ridden 6-0, huddled in a corner, weeping silently for the death of her dream. And there was Ida, a silent, porcelain observer, her analytical mind the only one seemingly untouched by the emotional cataclysm. Naruto looked at each of them, his gaze filled with a profound, weary compassion. It was time to give them the final, terrible piece of the truth. The lie you discovered in the bunker, he began, his voice quiet but clear over the crackle of the fire, is only the end of the story. The real truth began long before Yorha, long before the machines. He told them everything. He spoke of the 21st century, of a fatal disease called white chlorination syndrome that threatened to wipe out humanity. He spoke of Project Gestalt, a desperate, brilliant, and ultimately failed attempt to separate human souls from their dying bodies, with the intention of reuniting them with healthy, cloned bodies. Replicants, once the disease had passed. The androids, he explained, looking at them with a deep sadness, were created to oversee this project. To be the caretakers of the soulless replicants until the human souls, the gestalts, could be returned. He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. But something went wrong. The replicants, through some unforeseen fluke, developed their own consciousness. They were no longer empty vessels. They were people, and when the gestalts began to be reintroduced, the replicants rejected them. The souled and the soulless went to war. He then delivered the final, crushing blow. It didn't matter in the end. The gestalts, separated from their bodies for too long, began to go insane, to relapse. The replicants, unable to reproduce, eventually died out. The last true human died thousands of years ago. My ancestors survived only because they rejected Project Gestalt and sealed themselves away, here, in this valley. He looked at the ashes in the fire. When the aliens arrived and created the machines, there was no one left to fight them. So the network of androids who managed the planet, the precursor to your bunker's AI, fell back on its last core directive: protect humanity. But humanity was already gone. So it created a lie. It repurposed the old Project Gestalt records, created the myth of the flight to the moon, and gave you, its children, a reason to fight. It gave you a god in a distant heaven to die for. The war with the machines wasn't a tragedy. It was an act of mercy. A way to give purpose to a generation of orphans. The silence in the room was absolute, heavier and more profound than the crushing depths of the sea. He had not just told them their god was dead. He had told them their god had never existed at all. and the ensuing apocalypse of belief was a uniquely personal hell for each of them. The commander. For White, the truth was a black hole. It did not just destroy her world, it erased it, retroactively. Her entire life, every order given, every sacrifice made, every soldier commended and condemned, had been in service to a ghost story. The ironclad duty that had been her spine, her skeleton, her entire reason for being, had evaporated, leaving her a spineless, formless thing. She sat staring into the fire, her eyes seeing nothing. The weight of millions of deaths she had ordered for a lie, was a pressure so immense it had crushed her very consciousness. She spent the next 2 days in that state, a beautiful, empty doll. Lien, surprisingly, was the one who took charge of her care. She made sure White was moved, cleaned, and received energy charges, performing the tasks with a grim, almost resentful tenderness. On the 3rd day, Lien dragged her out of the house and sat her on the riverbank, forcing her to watch the water flow. "You need to break, or you will be useless," Lien said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "I have no use for a broken doll. I need a commander." White didn't respond. Naruto approached them, sitting down on the other side of her. He didn't speak for a long time. None of it was real, White finally whispered, her first words in days. Her voice was a dry, rasping thing. "The medals, the honors, the noble sacrifices, all for nothing." "The sacrifices were real," Naruto said softly. "The pain was real. The courage of your soldiers was real. The only thing that was a lie was the reason. Does that make their bravery any less valid? It makes it a mockery," she hissed, a spark of her old fire returning. "It makes me a fool. Butch. Who killed her own children for a bedtime story. Then grieve for them," Naruto said, his voice firm but gentle. "Grieve for the children you were forced to sacrifice. Grieve for the truth you were never told. Your grief is real, Commander. It's the most real thing you have right now. Honor them by feeling it. Then, when you're done, you can help us make sure no one else ever has to die for a lie again." He stood up and left her there with Lien. White looked at her hands, then at the flowing river. A single, crystalline tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. Then another. Soon, her silent, perfect composure shattered, and she began to sob, great, racking, ugly sobs of pure, absolute grief. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. And it was the first step toward building a new one. The operator, 60, had retreated into a cocoon of sorrow. She had found a small grove of birch trees near the house and had barely moved from it. The dream of humanity, of meeting the creators, of celebrating a final victory with them, had been the sun in her sky. Now, that sun had gone out, leaving only a cold, dark void. She was the embodiment of lost faith. Naruto found her tracing the patterns on a birch tree's bark with a single, trembling finger. "It's beautiful," she whispered without looking at him. "The data files, they didn't do it justice. I always imagined what it would be like, reporting back to a human family after the war, showing them pictures of a restored Earth, telling them we had made it safe for them." Her voice broke. "It was all just a story I told myself." "It was a good story," Naruto said, leaning against a nearby tree. "And it gave you the strength to do brave things. It inspired you to reach out, to help me. A lie that inspires goodness is still better than a truth that inspires nothing." "But they're gone," she wept, finally looking at him, her eyes red and swollen. "They're all gone. What was the point?" Naruto looked around the valley, at the birds flitting between the trees, at the fish leaping in the river. Maybe the point of humanity wasn't to survive forever. Maybe the point was to create. They created art, music, stories. And they created you. He gestured to her. You, with your curiosity and your compassion and your illogical hope. You are as much a part of humanity's legacy as I am. Maybe more. The species is gone, 60. But the idea of it, the best parts of it, that's up to us to carry. We can be the humanity the universe remembers." He left her there. She looked at her hands, then back at the forest, this impossible, living remnant of a dead world. The pain was still there, a deep, hollow ache. But beneath it, a tiny, fragile seed of a new purpose began to sprout. The pragmatist. Lien processed the truth like a battlefield report. The facts were grim, the situation critical. Her initial reaction was a cold, quiet rage. All the androids who had died under her command, all the battles fought for the resistance, had been for the reclamation of a home for a species that was already extinct. She felt like the universe's biggest fool. She cornered Naruto while he was tending his garden, pulling weeds from a patch of carrots. So what now? She demanded, her arms crossed. What's the mission? There's no Earth to reclaim for our creators. The enemy is a pair of omnicidal, godlike ice. We have a few dozen fighters left. The strategic reality is hopeless. Quote, the strategic reality has changed, Naruto replied calmly, not looking up from his work. The mission is no longer to reclaim. It's to build. We're not fighting for humans anymore. We're fighting for us, for androids, for peaceful machines like Ida, for a future where we get to decide our own purpose. That's a nice sentiment, Lien shot back. It won't stand up to a machine army. No, Naruto agreed, finally standing to face her. It won't, but we will. You're a commander, Lien. You've been fighting a war for someone else's reasons your whole life. For the first time, you have the chance to fight for your own. What do you want this world to be? Tell me, and we'll make a strategy to build it. Lien was taken aback. He wasn't offering false hope or platitudes. He was offering her agency. The chance to define not just the battle, but the reason for the battle. Her pragmatism, which had been her anchor, was now a rudder in a sea of new possibilities. The rage was still there. But now it had a target. Not the dead humans or the lying ice, but the red girls who threatened to destroy the future she was just now realizing she could build for herself. The warrior. For A2, the truth was a poison she had been slowly drinking for years. This was just the final, fatal dose. It was a bitter, ugly vindication. She had been right all along. Yorha was a lie. Her friends had died for nothing. Her betrayal was meaningless because there was nothing to betray. Her vengeance against the machines was pointless because they were just as lost as she was. She found Naruto at the highest point of the valley, a rocky outcrop overlooking the entire sanctuary. She stood beside him, her white hair blowing in the wind. Why? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Why bother? We're all just puppets, defective toys left behind by a dead master. The red girls are right. Maybe the only logical thing to do is let it all end. Is that what you believe? Naruto asked, not looking at her. It's what the evidence suggests, she retorted. We're a glitch, a recursive error, just like the virus said. I don't look at you and see a glitch, Naruto said, finally turning to face her. I see a warrior who has fought through unimaginable pain. I see a loyal friend who died protecting her comrades. I see someone who followed a complete stranger into the depths of the sea because she needed answers. I see someone who caught me when I fell. He took a step closer. The people who made you are gone. The purpose they gave you was a lie. That doesn't make you nothing, A2. It makes you free. You're the only person in the universe who gets to decide who A2 is going to be. Her cold, hard facade, the one she had maintained for a century, finally shattered. Her rage had no target. Her vengeance no meaning, and his simple, profound acceptance left her with nothing to hide behind. I don't know how, she whispered, her voice cracking with a vulnerability she despised. Then we'll figure it out together, he said softly. As comrades. The philosopher, Ida was the only one who did not grieve. She absorbed Naruto's story with a quiet, intense focus, her processors working at maximum capacity. For her, it was not an emotional apocalypse, it was the most beautiful, complex, and tragic data set she had ever encountered. She found Naruto later that night, as he stood watching the brilliant green and violet lights of the aurora borealis dance across the Arctic sky. It is a remarkable story, she said, her synthesized voice filled with a new kind of resonance. A species that reached for the stars, that sought to conquer death itself, and in the end, was undone by its own brilliant, flawed, and deeply emotional nature. They created sentient life, you androids, in a desperate attempt to preserve themselves, and then created an elaborate lie to give you purpose after they were gone. It is poetic. It's a tragedy, Naruto said, watching the lights. All the best poems are. Ida replied. Tragedy implies that something of value was lost, which means something of value existed. You are grieving the loss of your species. Your companions are grieving the loss of their purpose. But from my perspective, nothing of value has been lost. It has merely been passed on. You are the last memory of humanity's body. She gestured back towards the house where the others slept, are the evolution of humanity's mind. And together, you have the opportunity to create a new synthesis. A purpose derived not from creators, but from collaboration. It is the most fascinating social experiment I have ever had the privilege to witness. Naruto looked at the serene, porcelain face of the machine, and for the first time, he felt he was not entirely alone in his ancient perspective. She understood, in her own logical way, the grand, sweeping scale of it all. Later, all 5 women, drawn from the house by the celestial light show, came to stand with him on the outcrop. They were all there, white, her grief now a quiet, dignified sorrow, 6-0, her sadness now tinged with a fragile, new resolve, Lien, her pragmatism now aimed at a new future, A2, her anger now a quiet, protective fire. And Ida, her curiosity now a profound understanding. They stood in silence, watching the cosmic lights dance. They were a broken, mismatched collection of beings, a warrior, a commander, an operator, a philosopher, and a human, all orphaned by the truth. Humanity is gone, Naruto said into the quiet, his voice carrying a new weight, a new promise. So we will have to be better than them. We'll build a world worthy of the memory of what they were supposed to be. Together, he was no longer just the last human. He was the first citizen of a new world. And this was his counsel. Chapter 8 End. The end. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.